and friends of the University of Illinois, Chicago. Good morning, colleagues and friends of the University of Illinois, Springfield. Good morning, colleagues and friends of the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. On behalf of the University of Illinois system and the initiative Illinois Mexican and Mexican American Student Initiative, I welcome all of you to this International Symposium on Politics of Inclusion. Buenos días, estimados colegas y amigos de la Universidad de Illinois. Bienvenidos investigadores de varias universidades de México. A special welcome to students and to distinguished authorities and executives from different institutions. Gracias por su distinguida presencia. Thank you so much for wonderful presence here. I thank President Timothy Kalin for his leadership and enthusiasm recognizing the need and the opportunity that I-MMAS presents. I-MMAS, this initiative for Mexican and Mexican American students, represents a culture of support, building pipelines for Mexican and Mexican American students, smoothing the path, retaining as many talented students as possible, building a network of collaborators. I-MMAS is about partnering in collaboration with our peers in Mexico. I-MMAS will enhance ongoing efforts for the system's 3 universities to increase Mexican and Mexican American recruitment and expand their educational opportunities. I feel proud to be part of the 8th International I-MMAS Symposium with the participation of distinguished researchers from Mexico and the University of Illinois system. This symposium was organized by Drs. Adriana Crocker and Dr. Hinda Seif from the University of Illinois Springfield. Thank you for your leadership and great work. We thank all authorities and representatives of different institutions for their presence and remarks, especially the Chancellor of the University of Illinois system and Vice President of the University of Illinois system, Dr. Janet Good. Welcome. Connecting online, the Ambassador of the Consul General of Mexico in Chicago, Ambassador Reina Torres Mendívil. I think she's there. And the President of the University of Colima, Universidad de Colima, Mexico, that will give welcome remarks. But first of all, I need to introduce my boss, Dr. Pradeep Khanna, the Associate Vice President for Corporate and International Relations in the University of Illinois system. Gracias all of you for your participation. On behalf of I-MMAS at the University of Illinois system, I thank all the speakers for their meaningful and engaging presentations. I hope this will spark new collaborations, new discoveries, and then many problems will be solved. So we start with Professor Dr. Pradeep Khanna, Vice President, please.
Good morning to all of you. It's my great pleasure to be able to join you today morning for this wonderful session. I'd like to thank some of our distinguished colleagues who have joined us, Chancellor Gooch, Ambassador Torres, and the President of the University of Colima, Ortiz. It's wonderful to have you, all of us join today for what is a very important topic, the politics of inclusion that we are going to discuss today. As I reflect back, 3 years back, Professor De Mejia launched this program. First, she did this whole survey to understand the interest among our campuses, among our faculty and students, to have stronger relationships with Mexico. And that broad consultation led to the establishment of I-MMAS, or Illinois Mexican and Mexican American Students Initiative. The initiative has gone well beyond serving the students and led to establishment of strong research collaborations among faculty from our universities and at multiple universities in Mexico. And this collaboration has covered a range of topics. Very often when they think of University of Illinois, we talk about engineering, we talk about human health, we talk about environmental research. but this initiative has touched every single aspect, important aspects for all of us as human beings, as citizens in this society. US and Mexico are connected with each other historically. What happens in one country impacts the other and vice versa. So I think it's important for us to explore important issues that impact our society, the issues of inclusion, the issues of environment, the issues of labor, and many, many other things that come up. So it's my great honor to be here to join you for this symposium. I wanted to do it in person, and like many bureaucrats, I was late to start and then got lost. So I was in the university hall looking for the second floor till someone told me you're in the wrong buildings. Made it just in time. So thank you all, and I'll be back to you.
It's a really distinguished pleasure to have here the Chancellor of the University of Illinois Springfield. She is the Vice President of the university since about 2 years ago. So we welcome you and thank you for your remarks.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Janet Gooch, and I do serve as the proud Chancellor of the University of Illinois Springfield, and it's an honor to have you here today. So thank you for joining us. UIS is a very proud partner with I-MMAS and the University of Colima to present this important symposium. And UIS is strongly committed to belonging. So we heard about the universal aspect of today, and I'm going to bring it a little closer to home. UIS is very strongly committed to belonging, dignity, and justice for all. And we have a shared goal of providing as much support as possible for our Mexican, Mexican-American, and Latinx students, so that they are best positioned to successfully achieve their academic pursuits and their personal goals. About 8% of our students here at UIS are Hispanic, and we offer a wide range of support to students of all backgrounds. Programs such as our Hispanic Latinx Initiative, Men of Color program, First Generation Student Support Programming, they all help students achieve their goals while at UIS. We have the Necessary Steps Mentoring Program, International Student Services, who's representing here today, as well as various clubs and organizations. And they all exist to help students feel that sense of belonging and support that they need to be successful. In order for us to make progress in the important area of inclusion, we must first understand what barriers exist, as well as why they exist, which is why events like today's symposium are so critical. By looking at historical practices as well as current trends and decisions, we can identify possible solutions needed to balance the scales and the cycles that must be disrupted to achieve more optimal inclusion and parity. I am confident that today's discussions will move us closer to that ideal. Thank you again for being here today, and a special thanks to our UIS faculty, staff, and students who are participating. I'm so proud of the passion of our UIS community and what they bring to this topic. And later today, you will hear from some of our strongest advocates and experts on how to better serve and empower Mexican, Mexican-American, and Latinx students. It's now my privilege to introduce Ambassador Reina Torres Mendivil, Consul General of Mexico in Chicago. I will admit, I wish I knew Spanish a whole lot better. Again, thank you and have a great event.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a privilege to be here today. I very much enjoy all the events that I-MMAS organizes. I enjoy the enthusiasm that they put into enhancing the bilateral relationship in the field of education. I am also delighted to see here many of our universities in Mexico here represented. So congratulations to all of you for this outstanding event. In particular, I appreciate the leadership of Dr. Elvira de Mejia. I'm just going to say a few words of the relevance for us of the issues that you will be addressing in this event. The issue of inclusion has been at the top of our priorities during the last 4 years that I have been heading, and that I've had the privilege of heading this consulate. We have tried to develop new programs and align with the policies that our headquarters in Mexico to promote the inclusion of all our communities. For us, the consulate should be a space where everybody is represented. So that's why we have enhanced our programs, for example, to serve women, in particular to empower them through education. I highlight one of our programs for women entrepreneurs. We have graduated from this program more than 75 women so far. Our health booth, for example, that is also very important for us, has served so far this year more than 80,000 persons. We have specific programs for our indigenous communities, and it's also very relevant, the activities that we have displayed and the changes that we have made in our rules and regulations to make sure that our LGBTQ community is also included. So that is why these discussions that you are having today are so relevant. We're looking forward to continue this partnership with the University of Illinois system through I-MMAS to make sure that the Mexican community is well represented, is heard, and that new developments can favor their well-being, but also all those Mexican students that we were hoping to bring here to Chicago to get into the University of Illinois system. So once again, thank you for your leadership, and I look forward to the results of this symposium. Thank you. Now is my privilege to present the next panelist, which is Dr. Cristian Torres Ortiz Cermeña, Presidente de la Universidad de Colima, the President of the University of Colima.
Hola, muy buenos días. Gusto en saludarles. Mi nombre es Cristian Torres Ortiz Cermeño, rector de la Universidad de Colima, y me da mucho gusto saludar a la excelentísima señora embajadora Reina Torres Mendívil, cónsul general de México en Chicago, Estados Unidos. También saludo con mucho gusto a la doctora Janet Cook, rectora de la Universidad de Illinois en Springfield y vicepresidenta para el sistema de la Universidad de Illinois. También saludo al doctor Pradip Khanna, vicepresidente asociado para la cooperación y relaciones internacionales en el sistema de la Universidad de Illinois, y a la maestra Ana Cecilia García Valencia, directora general de Relaciones Internacionales y Cooperación Académica de la Universidad de Colima, y a los investigadores e investigadoras que nos acompañan esta mañana.
Good morning, everyone. It is with immense pleasure and respect that I greet Your Excellency, Ambassador Reina Torres Mendívil, Consul General of Mexico in Chicago, USA. Dr. Janet Gooch, Chancellor of the University of Illinois Springfield and Vice President of the University of Illinois System. Dr. Pradip Khanna, Executive Associate, Vice Chancellor for Corporate Relations and Economic Development. Maestra Ana Cecilia García Valencia, General Director of International Relations and Academic Cooperation of the University of Colima. And I also greet everyone gathered here today.
La Universidad de Colima es una fortuna poder estar en este evento de políticas de inclusión, porque poder poner sobre la mesa las tres funciones sustantivas que tenemos las universidades públicas en México. La enseñanza que podemos generar entre los estudiantes mexicanos y estadounidenses con nuevas e innovadoras oportunidades de formación. Tenemos claro que la visión a nivel local ya no es suficiente. Debemos fijarnos metas con una perspectiva global y preparar a nuestros estudiantes para ello. Eso es una necesidad y es una prioridad en la Universidad de Colima.
At the University of Colima, we're very proud to be part of this important symposium. I appreciate this valuable opportunity to highlight the three essential roles of a public university, such as teaching, research, and cultural extension. Firstly, through teaching, we can generate new and innovative training opportunities among our local level is no longer enough. Therefore, we must set goals with global perspective and prepare students for it, since it is already a necessity and a priority for us.
La segunda función sustantiva, que sería la investigación, que se ve materializada en eventos como el que nos convoca, pues coinciden profesoras y profesoras que comparten objetivos y proyectos para analizar temas de gran relevancia como el que nos ocupa, el de las políticas de inclusión en las Américas. Asimismo, daremos a conocer y aprovechar de otros profesores de distintas partes del continente y sobre todo podremos generar una memoria de conocimiento que podrá compartirse con nuestros estudiantes a través de la academia.
I believe that the vision, secondly, research which is materialized in events such as the one that brings us together today, since it makes possible to gather professors who share objectives and projects to analyze highly relevant topics such as the one at hand, inclusion policies in the Americas. Likewise, we will make known and take advantage of the good practices of other teachers from different parts of the continent. And above all, we will be able to generate a memory of knowledge that can be shared with our students through the academy.
Finalmente, también incidimos en una tercera función, como es la extensión de la cultura, ya que la movilidad entre estudiantes y profesores, el intercambio de información entre profesores y estudiantes y las relaciones académicas entre las universidades, podemos así fomentar una relación intercultural. Todo lo anterior se conjuga de forma fundamental para fortalecer un eje transversal que es muy importante en nuestra universidad, que es el de la internacionalización con la premisa de educar para el mundo.
Finally, indirectly, we contemplate the third essential role, which has to do with the extension of culture. Since with the academic mobility between students and teachers and the academic relations between both universities, we promote our culture and international development. All of the above is fundamentally combined to strengthen our transversal access of internationalization with the premise of educating the world. I recognize the collaborative work of the university authorities, of the University of Illinois, of the Council General of Mexico in Chicago, and above all the students, professors, and directors of the University of Colima.
Finalmente, quiero hacer un agradecimiento a la Cónsul General de México en Chicago, por supuesto a la Universidad de Illinois, y decirles que la Universidad de Colima para participar en este y otros proyectos y no nos queda más que agradecer su valiosa atención y desear el mejor de los éxitos en este evento académico.
I recognize all the work, all the collaborative work behind all this project, all the work done for the of the Consul General of Mexico in Chicago, and all of the students, professors, and directors. Our university has a lot to offer to the continent and the world. To all of you, my total recognition and gratitude for the organization of this symposium. I can only thank you for all your valuable attention and wish you the greatest success. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much to all our leaders and friends of I-MMAS, the University of Illinois system, and as President Kalin says, empower extraordinary. So thank you so much and welcome to continue joining us for the heart of this symposium. Thank you all for you coming here. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Adriana Crocker, who will continue with the program or start the program.
So hopefully you can see me above the microphone. I'm vertically challenged. So first, I'm going to read the objectives of today's symposium. Essentially, our goal is first to strengthen research collaborations with colleagues from Mexico on issues concerning the politics of inclusion in the Americas. and also to share, learn, and discuss histories and strategies to better serve Mexican American and Mexican students and communities at University of Illinois Springfield and the University of Illinois system. And now I'm going to be reading the bios. You probably have them, but I'm going to shorten mine because I guess it was too long as I was reading it. And so I'm going to read the next panelists that are going to be presenting, starting with myself and Dr. Cristina Tapia Muro. So I am a professor of political science for the School of Politics and International Affairs, and also Global Studies League at the university at our program. I teach comparative politics and international relations courses with an emphasis on Latin American politics. I have published 4 edited volumes, including the last one titled Gender Quotas in South America's Big Three, National and Subnational Impacts. More recently, I have published peer-reviewed articles on the status of gender parity legislation in Latin America and on the diffusion of hashtag Ni Una Menos, a social protest movement created to fight against misogynist violence in the region. Next will be Dr. Cristina Tapia Muro, who is a professor of political and social sciences at the University of Colima, Mexico. She has a PhD in economics and administrative sciences with public policy orientation from the University of Guadalajara, Mexico, and a specialization on public policy and gender justice from the Latin American Council of Social Sciences, CLACSO, and the Latin American College of Social Sciences, FLACSO, Brazil. Claudia Prado Mesa, who's present here with us, has been a professor at the School of Economics, Universidad de Colima, Mexico, since she graduated with a PhD in sustainable agriculture and a certificate in social justice and higher education from Iowa State University in 2013. Her interests are women entrepreneurs and business, women, gender, and internationalization at home. Currently, she is a leader of the research group 109, Transdisciplinary Business Studies. Some of her recent publications are dealing with psychological wear and family economy in an edited book called Impact on Developing Countries, Coronavirus Pandemic and Online Education, Impact on Developing Countries. And then Alon Castellanos Villarruel, an undergraduate women in economic and administrative sciences in Mexico, analyzing the impact of educational strategies for COVID-19 on the gender gap, en tópicos de educación, desigualdades sociales y poblaciones vulnerables, de la Universidad Autónoma de Zacatecas. Finally, Damián Vergara Bracamontes is an assistant professor in the Gender and Women's Studies Department at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Vergara Bracamontes is a scholar of Latinx migration studies, critical prison studies, and queer and trans of color critique with a focus on the social life of the law. He's currently working on 2 projects, one on LGBTQ immigrant detention, and his manuscript, The Administration of Illegality and Mexican Migrant Life, which traces the formation and consolidation of illegality in a new phase of prolonged social exclusion and control. His work has appeared in Ethnic Studies Review and Rowdy Magazine. Thank you. So I'm going to make sure I time myself because I'm not good with timing. You can do it? Okay, I'll work it. So if you have my power, yeah. I'm going to be also looking at my PowerPoint, so I'm going to be, you're going to see my side. The title of the presentation is Women's Description Representation, Argentina and Mexico, and it's a collaboration between myself and Dr. Cristina Tapia Muro in Mexico, in the University de Colima. Next. So our research project between Dr. Tapia Muro and myself is intended to study gender parity in both Argentina and Mexico comparatively, with a focus on subnational level policies and outcomes in both countries. Given that Mexico has been able to implement parity more successfully and beyond the legislature, this project is significant for other countries, including Argentina, at subnational level units to compare and contrast. So what is descriptive representation? Essentially, descriptive representation is the level at which government bodies reflect a nation's constituency. And why? Well, if we live in a representative democracy, governmental institutions should represent society at large in terms of gender, race, ethnicity, sexuality, etc. Next. And gender quotas are a type of descriptive representation in terms of gender. Legislated gender quotas are institutional mechanisms requiring political parties to fill a certain percentage of women candidates in party lists for legislative elections. So they're designed to improve the descriptive representation of women in public bodies of government. Why are these important? Well, the literature, including some of the work I've done, says that descriptive representation leads to substantive representation. That is, that personal characteristics and experiences help shape legislative priorities and policy preferences. Before we get into discussing Argentina, I'm going to contextualize this presentation in global terms. So as you can see, between 1945 to 1995, the number of parliaments increased by 150. Yet, when you look at the percentage of women parliamentarians and women senators, didn't increase more or less. In the first case, a little bit more than 8%. In the second case, even less than 8%. So descriptive representation of women in parliaments is really underwhelming. Next. Today, a little bit more than a quarter of women are represented in legislatures worldwide. All right, so 26.7%. Next. But between 1995 and 2022, particularly in the Americas, this has changed dramatically. And this is not because, sadly, the United States, but it's because of Latin America and the Caribbean, all right? And 1995 was a turning point for women in politics, because this is when the fifth conference on women took place in Beijing, and the ensued platform for action created a wave of gender quotas worldwide. So that's why it's important in 1995. Look at the increase in points in the Americas, 21.1 points from 1995 to 2022, followed by Europe, followed by Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. But Americas first. Next. In fact, the Americas today has 34.7% of women in parliaments, all right? Again, followed by Europe, Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. Next. So why? Essentially, primarily, it's because of these legislative gender quotas that appeared in Latin America, started in Argentina in 1991, and in sort of a wave through the Americas, where between 20 or 40% minimum percentage requirements for candidate lists were adopted as law or in constitutional amendments as well. It was initially a Latin American phenomenon, the adoption of gender quotas, but since then they have spread worldwide. By 2021, 138 countries were using gender quotas, different types. You can ask me later on if you have questions, but 138 countries adopted gender quotas. And within the first decade of the new millennium, the wave changed from quotas that require 20 to 30 to 40% to now parity, 50%. So the laws require that women fill 50% of the candidate pilot list for legislative elections, and in many cases, we're going to see in the case of Mexico, beyond the legislature. 10 Latin American countries have introduced or implemented parity laws, and the wave is still ongoing. These have led the region to have some of the largest proportions of women in the world, all right? Mexico is a number 1 in the Americas. It's number 4, place number 4 of 180 something countries, according to Interparliamentary Union. Bolivia and Costa Rica are placed within the first 10. Argentina is today number 17, but they had elections 2 weeks ago, so hopefully it will go up a little bit in that ranking. So how this diffusion of policy occur? Why is it that some countries adopted, starting in Argentina, and there was this kind of a wave? Well, these waves were characterized by the strong role of women's organizations and international organizations, particularly in the case of parity, the Economic Commission of Latin America, and the conferences of women that take place every 3 years. And they are ensued documents or consensuses that push countries to adopt parity. For example, Ecuador was the first country in Latin America to adopt gender parity, and that happened right after the conference in Quito. Internally, leadership roles, from presidents to legislatures to women NGOs, play an extremely important role in adopting gender parity in these countries. Next. So these are the Latin American countries with gender quotas. 18 of the 20 Latin American countries have today gender quotas. And the ones who are highlighted are the ones that have gender parity, all right? So there is 50% requirement, minimum. As the implementation has not been as smooth, particularly because we use different electoral systems, because they're introduced in a different manner. For example, Honduras introduced gender parity, and Patrick is here from Honduras originally, introduced gender parity, but only at the primary level elections. So by the time you get to the general election, they're watered down, and they're a little bit more than 20% of women because of that. Next. So what about Argentina? Well, Argentina, as I said, it was the first country in the world to adopt legislative quota. Not even the legislators knew what they were doing when I adopted the quota, much less the president when he actually signed the bill into law. But that's why it took more than 15 years to go from quotas to parity in Argentina. And it was not until 2016, after 8 bills did not pass, to pass the last one and we implemented in 2017. Next. This is what happened in Argentina regarding legislators. From quotas, 1991, I told you, they had only like 4% of women in the Senate, 6% of women in the lower chamber, and then the various regulations, because in 1993, for example, they were placing women at the bottom of the list, so they were not elected. So there were several regulations, expansion to the Senate, and so on, until you can see the 2017 with gender parity. The last elections, the last numbers I have is 2021, but you cannot see here because it's the last one. There. So today, or until the last election, which was 2 weeks ago, there were 44.8% of women in the lower house and 43.1% of women in the Senate. Hopefully, after this election, we'll reach parity at least in the lower house. Next. This is the provincial level. As you can see, the 22 provinces of the 24 districts have gender quotas as well. But because of the electoral systems and how these quotas have been implemented, they have not been as successful in some cases. There are only 2 provinces with no parity. And hopefully in the near future they will, and they will also change the way they actually put together these quotas. Next. So I show you a list. This is the way we vote in Argentina. It's called proportional representation. closed list system. So when the voter goes and votes, you cannot pick your candidates, because if they did, we wouldn't have parity in Argentina. So you just have to vote with the list, all right? And as you can see here, you have men alternating with women. So it's not only 50%. So the 12 candidates, 6 are women, but they also have to be placed in alternation. Otherwise, they would have been placed at the bottom of the list and not elected with parity, right? Similar with the substitutes, they're also alternated. So despite the constitutional clause on affirmative action for women for all elected posts, women remain underrepresented in the other 2 branches of government because there's not a really workable gender quota. This deficiency confirms the critical role of gender quotas in parities and parity systems in promoting women's representation in bodies of government. Next. So this is a judiciary, for example, which has been very difficult to achieve some kind of parity in the judiciary in Argentina. And as Dr. Tapia Muro will discuss later on, same thing in Mexico. So look at where the women are in administrative positions, in the lower positions. The higher the positions in the judiciary as prosecutors, as ministers of justice, or public defenders, which public defenders, by the way, are a very important job in Argentina. They actually remain very underrepresented. Next. How much time do I have? Okay. Perfect. So the same thing is with the executive. So Argentina has had 2 female presidents and 3 female vice presidents. So it's one of the countries with more representation of women, right, at that level. Yet the current government has only 22.2% of the total cabinet positions, right? And women governors have decreased since the last presidential election to only 2 of 24. We'll see what happens after the next election. Women mayors are around 12% of the total, and only 2 provinces had more than 20% of the total mayors. According to Marlis Josami from the Fondos de Mujeres del Sur, the situation of women mayors in Argentina is like an obstacle race. Next. So this is, since 1993, Argentina has had democratic government. We've had a dictatorship for quite some time before. And as you can see, women, the proportion of women in ministries have increased, but have remained stale for the last 2 presidencies at 22%, all right? So that is an issue that it has to be considered, particularly for the next president, hopefully. Next. Social media also play a key role in promoting the inclusion of women. That was in the one on the left, the Racing Club. I don't know, those of you who are fans of soccer, Racing Club organized a game of soccer, women's soccer, that says, let's level the field, all right? At all, and these were political women. It's a Parlamentarias Mentoras. She is from the province of Buenos Aires, and they work across political parties too. And here, because what kind of women are we going to get? You know, we want to get women that really represent women's interests. So many women were protesting in favor of having feministas en las listas. Hashtag feministas en las listas. Not any women, feministas, all right? Next. And these are women that are saying, let's level the field. Next one. So parity has become the new game in town for women. I'm done. Legislators in Argentina, yet whereas gender parity has been adopted in both national and subnational level legislatures, it has not been implemented uniformly. In addition, without gender parity, women have been overwhelmingly underrepresented in Argentina's executive and judicial branches of government. Thank you. Okay, Cristina Tapiamuro would follow. Thank you, Cristina.
Thank you, Dr. Crocker. Well, hello. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share some of the work that Professor Adriana Crocker and I are doing at this moment. Well, my presentation is about the effects of gender quotas in terms of descriptive representation. We will analyze the composition by sex of the different branches, executive, legislative, and judicial, at both federal and subnational levels, in order to understand the Mexican path toward parity. Next, please. Well, issues of parity and the representation of women have been approached from different perspectives. In this panorama, it's possible to distinguish three main lines. First, causes and the processes of affirmative action for increasing the presence of women in politics. Two, different effects of these actions on issues like, for example, both descriptive and substantive representation of women and other historically underrepresented groups. And three, the relationships between different contextual factors and affirmative actions. For example, structures and practices of political parties, media, etc. In addition, in a transversal way, some of the most important variations in the literature come from different spatial levels, and obviously the cases of interest. Next, thank you. Well, in Mexico, like in Latin America, the path to parity has been developing for the last 30 years. As you can see, in 1993, modifications were made to the Federal Code of Electoral Institutions and Procedures, COFIPE in Spanish. However, in this first moment, such inclusions represented just a recommendation. In 2002, a maximum quota of 70% was specified for either sex in the candidacies for legislative branch, as well as consequences in case of non-compliance. Gender parity became a reality until 2014, but only in the legislative branch. 5 years later, in 2019, the constitutional reform Parity in Everything was published. It extended this principle to executive and legislative branches across their different levels. Next, please. Well, Vasquez, for example, analyzes the constitutional reform Parity in Everything, highlighting both its scope and the challenge for the implementation. And she explains that the modification related to parity as a transversal topic do not entail dismissal of personnel, but will be applied progressively to the designations made after their publication. Also, well, in the legislative branch, the candidacies for both deputies and senators and corresponding to proportional representation too. In the executive branch, well, designation of the cabinet members at the state and federal levels, candidacies for position of public election, municipalities, and indigenous representatives. And in the judicial branch, the formation of judicial federal and state bodies. As we will see in the data, the characteristics of the action promoting parity have allowed significant progress, even though challenges remain. Next, please. Well, different branches have shown a heterogeneous increase of women in office. The difference between branches can be explained by factors such as the levels of government, national or subnational, selection mechanism, duration of the position, the existence of roles and gender stereotypes in certain activities, among many others. So, as you can see, currently, the Congress of the Union demonstrates parity. The Chamber of Deputies is made of 50% women and 50% men, while the Senate is made of 50.8% men and 49.2% women. However, if we observe the composition during the 90s, men represented more than 80% in both chambers. As we can see, the condition generated in 2002 created a marked trend toward the increase of women in the legislative branch. Next, please. Well, in the congresses of each of the federal entities, parity has practically also become a fact in recent years. In just 2 states, the percentage of women is less than 50%, but only by a slight difference. However, in order to understand the mechanisms that have favored this outcome and improve it, we should analyze disaggregated data that you can see in the slide. Concerning the proportion of female deputies elected by proportional representation, the national average is 43.1%, but for men, this percentage reaches only 34%. In most entities of the Mexican Republic, as you can see, 72%. The proportion of women selected by proportional representation is higher than the corresponding percentage of men. So although parity has been reached in the legislative branch at the local level, it has been the result of affirmative actions, specifically the selection of them by proportional representation. Well, the Mexican case is consistent with literature. Several works documented that countries with electoral systems of proportional representation integrate a greater number of women in their parliaments than states whose system is majority-based. Next, please. Sorry. In the executive branch, well, as in the legislative case, significant progress have occurred in terms of parity. However, although affirmative action have produced important results, women still have difficulty accessing positions of power. As you can see, at the state level, the proportion of women as governors has increased from the immediate previous period of the equivalent year. So from 6.2% to 31.2%, showing a difference of 25 points. Concerning the states in which women were elected as governors, there are certain similarities about political gender violence, about education, and about gender roles. Regarding political gender violence, 90% of those states present lower levels of people sanctioned for this than the national average. In fact, 60% of those states have no cases at all for the period 2020-2021. In education, 90% of those states reflect a higher average level than the national level. And about gender roles, 80% of those states reflect a lower gender gap in the average weekly hour dedicated to unpaid work in home than the average for the entire country. So, next please. However, at local level, the composition of city councils or municipalities have shown a trend toward parity. But again, if we disaggregate this data by position, well, the proportion of women as municipal presidents or mayor is lower than men, just 23.1%. Concerning the three states with the highest proportion of women as mayor, Baja California, Tamaulipas, and Tabasco, we can see some similarities again. So states where the presence of women in the executive branch has advanced show high educational levels and more egalitarian societies, since there is less difference between the sexes in terms of time dedicated to home care activities. Sorry, next please. About the composition of the federal public administration, well, the distribution by functions shows that in 2019, the majority were men. Data after the parity in everything reform show a positive change. The proportion of women increased from 17.6% in 2018 to 23.7% in 2021. At the state level, as you can see in the slide, the proportion of women heads of public administration institutions also shows recent advances. In 2020, the national average was 27.1% women, which increased to 34.3% in 2022. In 2022, across all states, 87.5% of them show a greater or equal position of women than 2 years earlier. The only exception were Coahuila, Chihuahua, Mexico City, and Guanajuato. Next, please. Well, what about judiciary branch? As in the executive branch, parity in the judicial branch is recent. Let's remember the reform, Parity in Everything reform 2019. According authors like Fierro and Burgos, the low receptivity of this arena to the presence of women may be because although the regulations are apparently gender neutral, they specify sometimes the requirement for some position to respond to the needs of the service, which frequently could imply mobility. So other works suggest that these represent a relevant barrier for women because of domestic and childcare tasks. So the proportion of women in plenary session of the judicial power of the Federation reached 34.7% in 2022. That is increased by just over 10 points from 2018. As we can see in the graph, the Federal Judicial Council is the closest space to parity, while the Supreme Court of Justice of the nation reflects a significant increase in women. The Electoral Tribunal of Judicial Power of the Federation demonstrates the least progress in the matter and has remained in the same condition in recent years. Just 28.5% of its positions are occupied by women. Next, please. Well, as we saw, advances in descriptive representation of women are heterogeneous among different branches, exhibiting more progress in legislative since both federal and local congresses reflect parity. In contrast, both executive and judicial branches have been affected by regulatory provisions for parity just recently. So the Parity in Everything reform arose only in 2019, and not until 2020 were such changes made for the corresponding frameworks to warrant it. Progress have been made in the presence of women in government and municipal presidencies, with municipalities being the closest spaces to parity. However, main areas of opportunity remain in public administration. Finally, the judiciary branch reflects progress toward the incorporation of women. However, it still does not represent equality. We can conclude that despite this optimistic picture, there are challenges to overcome. Thank you very much. That's all.
Understood that Europe had better parity than the US for many years. And has that changed with your new chart there? Are you looking strictly at the federal level or?
Oh, well, Europe, there's several countries in Europe that have gender parity. These include France, Italy, Spain, but others do not. For example, the UK has parity at party level. So essentially only certain political parties can have parity or not. So the Labour Party has a 50% parity. The Liberal Democrats, this is in the UK, have 40%. And the Conservative Party, which is a ruling party now in the UK, none, zero. So that essentially makes up the House of Commons of very low, about maybe 20% or so. I don't have the data right now, so I'm just making that up, but I can look it up. Other countries have, so we include all of Europe, and some, as I said, some European countries have been very serious about parity, and that's particularly the case of Spain and France. But for example, France, can I keep going, or is it too much? Okay, France, for example, has not a very friendly legislative system for women because they have majoritarian, very similar to the US. We have plurality, so it's one person you elect per district, all right? But in the case of France, it has to be majority, it has to gain at least more than 50% of the votes in order for the legislator to win a seat, all right? So they could go to a runoff election. And this dilutes also the parity in France as well. So these are the problems that are facing, the problems of implementation. And really it's not culture, it's really institutions. It's really how institutions are designed. Because like Mexico, for example, and you can add to that What happened at the beginning when they just had 30% quota in Mexico, that the Juanas, las Juanas, what happened? Can you tell the public, the audience?
Yeah, well, in Mexico, with the quotas at the beginning, the parties try to fill the quota with women, but when they get to the position, well, they quit and they put the substitute, and the substitute were men. So right now, well, they were made changes in the legislation to prevent and eradicate this kind of behavior.
In other words, institutions, electoral system, proportional representation, closed list better than open list, because you don't want to give the voter the choice, because the voter chooses men, like it happened in Brazil, for example, that has a quota, but has not been able to implement it well. And so the less choices voters have, the more women actually can achieve parity. It's very sad, but we still live in a very patriarchal society. That's why. There are 7, yeah. Comentarios. Yes, Gina.
This is so different from our situation in the United States. I don't know if everyone in Mexico knows, but we have very few quotas legally in the US, and even affirmative action, which was absolutely not a quota-based system. The Supreme Court recently decided that we could no longer consider race and admissions to higher education institutions. So the University of Illinois and all universities are grappling with that. I guess one question would be, why do you think this is possible in so many countries, yet in the US, it's practically unimaginable to have quotas, racial quotas, gender quotas for political positions?
Yeah, I think, if I'm not wrong, Matt is here. He's a specialist in American government, but only the Democratic National Convention has some kind of quota. That's the only part of the government. But yeah, he can add to that. He specializes. Why don't we have quotas, Matt? Oh, yeah.
Oh, the DNC requires it for its party committees at the state and local level.
Okay.
And the RNC does not, although some state level Republican parties do require it. But of course, as you mentioned before, the institutions, being a member of a party doesn't mean you're one of the candidates in the US system. So we might have parties in these, or we might have parity in these party organizations, but that doesn't necessarily translate to parity in the candidates who run for office. Excellent.
Yeah. And it's also the electoral system, you know, they having one member per district be elected, as Cristina was saying. Even in Mexico, where you have a mixed member system, you have both proportional representation and plurality. It works better in proportional representation. I mean, the literature says that if you have a list of candidates, the seats are going to be won by a more diverse body, not only on the basis of women, but also on the basis of ethnicity, background, and so on. And the electoral system in the US does not help to have that kind of diversity in the legislature. So, yeah.
Hello, I am from Latin America, El Salvador specifically. And in Latin America in general, I guess because of their culture, in part, women do not tend to get involved in political parties or look for government positions or being candidates. My question is, if in any of these countries around the world, there is a quota for women in public service, let's say 50%, but there are only 25% candidates, what do they do? Are there any initiatives to promote or push women to look for those type of positions? Because it doesn't really matter to have a law if there are no people to fill those positions or interested on them.
Do you want me to answer first and then you want to add some? Okay, the quota is a requirement. In order for a party list to, in most countries, the difference is among different Latin American countries. I'm talking about Argentina and Mexico. That's a requirement. So in order for party lists to present themselves for elections, they have to have that quota. They have to comply with the 50%. If they don't, they cannot run for elections. So they better find them. And what they have been doing is training women. So that picture that I showed you about let's level the field, the red de mentoras políticas, that's exactly what they are. They are a wave of mentoring future women to become politicians and train them, because that could be a problem to find candidates, so let's mentor them. And they're going across political parties as well. If women see that there is a friendly environment for them, they will run for politics. They are as educated, if not more educated today. They are more actually educated women than men today. They go to colleges and receive college degrees, more women than men today in Latin America. So evidently they have the education and they have the merits. So they should, and they have an environment that is friendly for women. So they should be able to run for politics. And that's why I don't think there have been many problems in finding women to run for legislators. Has it in Mexico? Has it been a problem to find candidates, women candidates?
I guess something that I think that women have been in politics since, they just don't have the recognition. So they are in the political parties, but they don't have that position to run for the election. So now quotas are pushing the political parties to give them that recognition and the candidacies. So they are there. So, but it's a lack of, I don't know, it's like a bias, like a bias way to look the policy, to think that women are outside and just for quotas, they are going into.
Yeah. Yes. 5 minutes.
So I just want to add something to that. Dr. Tapia and I did a research, oh my God, when I first got to university, perhaps 10 years ago, and we start interviewing women who were actively participating in this type of parties, especially PRIPA, the main ones. And one of the conversations that we had a lot is women will share with us that they were the ones organizing the communities, the neighborhood, like doing all these events, bringing the families together, introducing the other politicians and the plans that the party had for the entire term if elected. But when deciding who to propose as a candidate, they were never recognized. So they were doing all the hard work. They were mobilizing all the communities. They were like shaking and like making the community get involved and participating. But when the party had to choose who select, they weren't selected. And I remember one of the participants that I interviewed, he was like, I'm very young. His name was Miguel. I'm very young, I'm 26, and I'm already, I was already selected for a position. So I'm very happy, and this changed drastically my relationship with, let's say, Adriana. Adriana started in this way before than I did. She knows a lot of people, she's really hardworking, and she has never selected to any position. So I'm doing way better than her, and I'm younger, and I'm like, no, dude, that's not the case. That's not why you are being selected at all. So now the party is like, they have to recognize. They have been there. They have been doing all the job. So they have to.
One of the incidents, and we probably have to finish. One of the incidents that happened in Argentina when they just created this quota law is that at congressional level, in Congress, there were no bathrooms for women. So they had to build bathrooms because all of a sudden we have this 30% of women and they didn't have bathrooms for them, all right? And the other issue was how to vote. When you vote in Argentina in Congress, there is this kind of pedals. It looks like an accelerator in your car, a pedal. And they were so far away that women could not reach the pedal because they were shorter than men in many cases. And so they had to stand up, and now they changed the technology in that too, you know, to help women. So yeah, my podium, this is not made for me, definitely. So you're right. So they have to adjust and adapt, you know, to the new circumstances of more women coming to politics. So yeah.
There's a couple questions online.
Okay.
Jaden Likesle, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, asks, how do we maintain a democratic voter system while also working towards parity?
Well, I think they're the same, one and the same. So if you are talking about, we live in representative democracies and we have 50% of women in a given society, shouldn't we have also 50% of women in bodies of government? So we are following representative democracy, but the problem are the countries that do not have that percentage. So we do maintain and follow principles of democracy. And actually one of the reasons why parity was adopted is precisely because of that. If we live in democracies, we should have represented the constituencies in Congress, in the legislatures, or in other bodies of government and beyond, you know, in the industry and so on, higher education, everywhere. Hopefully I responded. Do you want to say something else?
Okay, there's one more question from Martin Nieto. Are there any efforts in Mexico to promote the idea of gender equality and parity in popular culture?
Huh?
Well, INE, the Electoral Institute, are working in media like campaigns, no, to sensibilize the population, to create conscience about the relevance of women in politics. So I guess media.
Everyone, thank you for inviting me to this symposium on the politics of inclusions. I like especially to thank Adriana and Hinda for making my visit here a possibility, and also Elvira that I get to meet today. Thank you so much for everything. So next one, please. I'll be sharing the findings of a project that is titled Los Rostros del Activismo, Análisis de la Relación Social entre Género y Acción Social, which translates to the Faces of Activism, analysis of the relationship between gender and social actions. So for this particular presentation, I'm just focusing on an article that actually I'm writing with Dr. Cristina Tapia, who just met her, and Dr. Antar Martinez. And this article is about just empowerment and social participation in these women that are doing activism. I'm going to start the presentation sharing a little bit about Colima, the context about where Colima is located and how the situation is for women that do activism in that state. Then the methodology, who got to participate or collaborate in this project and how we analyze the data that we got. And finally, the conclusions or key findings. So for the literature review, I thought there will be more students, and so I had this conversation about gender perspective and why it was important to do research on gender perspective, because basically it's really important for us not only about disaggregating data, right? Like women and men and get to participate in this, but also how women get to organize and how situations that are common for men affect in a different way to women. So we did the research on the wings, for example, for the theoretically Sandra Harding and Marcela Lagarde. And one of the things that we wanted to make sure was to understand how women and men are affected differently when doing activism and the kind of relationships that develop among each other and how these relationships differ and why. So the other two aspects that we also analyze in these articles is women's empowerment, and because we want to understand their participation. When we analyze women's empowerment, we are in understanding their participation for this particular article. We're just focusing on the impact that public funding has in their empowerment, but also the local regulations that are in place. Are those helping to women to participate more or to participate less? Well, I already explained a little bit of this, and there is one slide that is missing, but it's okay. I'm going to explain a little bit. It's about, that's okay. Thank you so much. So the slide that is missing, it was I was sharing a little bit about Colima and the context in which all the women that we interview, all the context in the ways that they were doing their activism. And one of the things that we found is being an activist in Mexico is not easy. So as I already told you, we conducted the research from 1214 to 1218, 1218. And one of the news articles that it was very popular at the time, there was a spyware that was quite used from the government to spy activists, and it's called Pegasus. So they were basically tracking their cell phones, and they found that they were using it, the Mexican government was using this as spyware to track human rights activists, also lawyers who were defending these activists, and journalists. And at some point, early this year, it was also found that this current federal government is still using that spyware, even though when this president was a candidate, was completely opposite to that practice, and he condemned it. He's also apparently benefiting from using that spyware. Another aspect that we found about Colima is very small state. It's in the Pacific side of the country. It's exactly in the middle. It's the third smallest. And regarding people, we are the less populated one. However, we are always, well, we have been in the list of one of the states with most domestic violence. We're always in the top 10 rank. The domestic violence and the number of women that are killed by their partners or relatives or close relatives is really high. That's one of the reasons why we have something that is called Alerta de Violencia de Género. So basically, this is a federal program in which the federal government gives more funding or money or allocates more money to the state government in order to stop or to prevent this type of violence. One of the things that is happening though in Colima, and Dr. Tapia already explained it better than I did, and I'm gonna do, is we are getting towards having parity in all the chambers, the local and the federal ones. And also in 2021, a woman was elected as a governor. Her name is Indira Vizcaíno. And so I'm gonna keep talking because the slides that I need are not there. But as you see in the photos, those are portraits that another professor, photography professor took. And we had a methodology that is called photo voice. So we use a lot of photos to do this research. And it was really interesting because This particular photographer, this particular professor was taking a lot of photos of them, portraits, also photos of the work that they do, but also the activists were taking a lot of photos about what they do, what they do it, where do they do it, and what are the reasons why they keep doing this work. And so we had really long conversation about their activism, and we were trying to understand how it has changed over the years. And that resulted in a sample that it has 3 different stages. So we have the sample that we have activists that are doing gender parity, the gender empowerment, that are doing environmental activism and animal welfare. And so we have women that are 18 to 68 years old. And okay, so we have the initial stage, medium stage, and mature stage. And we use an approach called life course approach to identify if they are doing differently stuff and why they are doing it differently, especially regarding empowerment and getting public funding from the state government. Let's see, next one. So finally, regarding empowerment, so one of the things that we found, that we try to figure out with empowerment is if, based on 2 things, an aspect that the government can control regarding regulatory framework and funds from public source. And we would like to explain, I would like to explain a little bit about empowerment first. If we analyze it, and if we are talking about giving a voice to people, but also it's not about just making them visible, allowing them to have a say in important decision and processes. So to make this happen, it is really important to have a space, a mechanism, and resources in place that encourage and enable participation. So that's why we decided to analyze the regulatory framework, public financing, 2 aspects that the government can control. Next one. So what did we find? So these are the findings. So I don't know if you remember where we have 3 different stages. The very young activists, then the medium and mature stage, and those are like 3 different groups of activists. And when we start analyzing empowerment, we realize that the way that they do this empowerment aspect or that they get involved is very different depending on the stage of life that they are. The activists that were in the initial stage, they were very active about visibilizing a problem or a social issue. They were participating in protests a lot. So for example, in Colima, a lot of the young activists, a lot of the activists that were participating regarding legalizing abortion were really, really young. And they were really open about it. And they weren't afraid to show their faces and to voice their opinions. And however, when we analyze the same aspects, the activists that were in the medium and mature stage, they were more focused on changing legislation. Like if we change the law, it will be easier for other communities get more involved, to be recognized, to be more visible, and to have their voice heard. So we found that they participate in a different way in the political process, in the regulatory framework. And then regarding public financing, this was really interesting too. Well, for me, obviously, because I did the project, but even now it was really interesting. So in order to have access to public funding from the state government, you have to be registered, and you actually have to go through a really long process to get registered. It's not an easy process. I don't know if it's the same for here. So only those activists who were in the middle or mature stage, they have all the paperwork done, and in order to actually be able to have access to these calls and to these grants. One of the things that we found, though, that the calls that the state government does and granting the money is actually, it was quite erratic. And so this meant that the activists that were in the initial stage, they didn't have access to public funding. However, one of the things that we found is since they work closely with other activists, because Colima is so small, they had somehow access, or they could benefit from accessing to these fundings. So they will share some way. And another aspect that we found is some activists were adamantly saying no to have access to this, to use this type of funding, because they feel it's like, if I receive money from the government, they're gonna think that they have a say in what I do, the way I do it, and why I do it. So I rather to use my own resources, regardless if they are little or not, instead of using the state resources to participate and to keep participating in this type of activity that I do. And I'm finally going to conclude that it's one of the things that we found, it's really important how empowerment works in order to create effective public policies. So we found that the government actually plays a crucial role on how much these activists were participating in empowerment activities and activities that will empower them. But what we found, it's not that the local government was creating created spaces for women to participate in an active manner in the decision-making process. What we found is these activists were actively working on changing regulations to make sure that their voice was heard, but not only theirs, also those who are kind of like marginalized communities. For example, abortion was legalized, and now it's against the law, something that it's called terapia de reconversión. Basically, it's camps for convert LGBT community to, so that's one of the legislation that is new. Another legislation that is new, it is quite easy in Colima to change all your birth certificate and everything if you are transitioning from male to a transgender community. And another aspect that also changed recently is regarding animal welfare, which has becoming a huge issue. And right now there is an interesting conversation happening. Regarding funding, what we found is if you are a mature activist, if you are an activist in the mature stage, it's very likely that you are well recognized among the activist communities. So it will be you have the social capital to access to this type of funding in an easier way. Contrary to those activists who are really young and they are still learning how to participate in all these processes, they are still kind of new faces, so they don't know how all the administrative processes work, so they don't have access to this type of funding. However, they have been a really nice community in which they share resources, but also there is a really good proportion of women activists who are like, we are not taking part of those fundings, we don't need them, or if we need them, we rather to work without them because working with the government is sometimes usually bad news. And so even though we have a different party now, things are different, but that doesn't mean necessarily they're especially better. And sorry about the confusion with the presentation, but that's pretty much. The questions at the end, okay. Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering whether, first of all, some of the activists have been involved in government as well, or have they become legislators?
Yes.
Number one. And number two, has it made a difference since you have a woman governor in Colima?
That's a really interesting question. So when we decided the sample, we decided that they had to be doing activists in Colima, right? So for at least 3 years. And also they have to be, they couldn't be underage just because of the legal reasons, so 18 and older. And another aspect that we actually was really important for us when deciding the activists that we will be collaborating with, it was like their activism shouldn't be related to a political party, to the church, or to the government. So we want them to be like completely independent. So if we look at the sample in 2014, and if we look at the sample now, almost 10 years later, now that a different party is in power in Colima, we couldn't interview a lot of the women that we interviewed 10 years ago, because a lot of them were working so hard on changing all the legal framework that now they are in some public positions. So some of them, they are in public positions because the same NGOs proposed them and had these events in which they were like, we are proposing the future governor, this person, because she has shown that knows about the topics. She has worked closely with the communities. She actually cares about the community. So we have a lot of people that are in power now, that are in positions in the public, in the government, because they were proposed by the NGOs. And there were some others that now that there is a new party, they have relationships, or they kind of like, they were more inclined more to the left, which Morena is supposed to be. So that's why they are more involved with the government. So yeah, that's an interesting, very interesting question. So it has changed. Yes. In some aspects, things are good. In some aspects, things are not. So Mexico has 32 states. And each state has their own legislation regarding issues. I think you understand this better than me. But for example, when thinking about that, Colima is one of the very few states in which now it's possible to have access to abortion. Also, the identity law regarding transgender, also the banning of all this conversation therapy. I don't know if it's the same term in here. Yes, it is the same. Okay, so it's banned. So things have changed in that sense because a lot of the legislators are part of Morena, which is perhaps a little bit more to the left than the previous parties. But there are some stuff that I still need to work. So for example, access to funding was easier with the previous parties than now. Now that we have been working with Indira, she's been in power since 2021, there hasn't been no call whatsoever to grant fundings for NGOs in Colima. So in that sense, a lot of NGOs are having a really, really hard time, even though they keep doing the job that they do. So it's a mix between, it's not so bad, but in some others it's really bad. Mm-hmm.
So like I'm learning a lot from it. And I was curious to hear from you what the reception is of people in the state of Colima about the participation of the women's activism. So like, how are the women responding to it? How are the men responding to it? You explained a little bit that the climate is really hostile. And so, you know, I just kind of want to hear how that happens.
So the domestic violence in Colima hasn't getting any better. There was a national survey that was published at the beginning of this year, and the results show that Colima is still one of the most violent states towards women. Especially, there are two types of domestic violence that are most common ones: the domestic violence and also the psychological violence. And what is really, really sad, it starts really early. Women since age of 11 years old start complaining about being in somehow of a violent situation. So that situation hasn't changed. And a conversation that I was having with Adriana yesterday during lunch, it was, we have more women, as you saw in the previous presentation, we have more women in the local chambers. But these women have also, a lot of these women have also been very open about being victims of political violence. And what is sad is when sharing their situation and explaining why they have been suffering violence, they don't have the support of the large community saying, yeah, I believe you. So it's usually they face their accusations with criticism. It's like, maybe she did something, or maybe he didn't mean it, or maybe she's overreacting. So even though they are local politicians and they were elected and they have a positions, they were facing that they didn't have the support, and how difficult it was to put an accusation in place, even though they have all the paperwork to show that something bad was happening. So it was a learning experience for them. They felt really lonely. All the interviews that they did and all the talks that in which they share the aspect, it was like, we don't have the support, and the institutions that are in place to help them, they are usually connected with the local government. So it also felt that the support that they were receiving was not effective or enough. So in that case, Colima still has a lot of work to do. Like, yes, we have parity in the chambers, we have a governor, but that doesn't mean that the violence is diminishing or decreasing at any point sometime soon. I think that's it. Thank you so much for your, yeah, that's a 0. That's my 0. So thank you so much for your questions and invitation.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you to the organizers, Doctora Crocker, Mejia, and himself for the invitation, and to all the staff for putting this event together and making it possible, as well for all of you both on Zoom and in person here. It's really exciting to have these kind of transnational conversations that, I hope to be a part of more. So my presentation is going to turn to the US to think about what the experiences of women and transgender women's migration experience are once they arrive into the States, and how gender is impacting their experiences here. Do we have the presentation? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. Okay, so for today's discussion, I will focus on one of the most powerful sites to produce and manage illegality, detention, and specifically alternative detention facilities, or family residential centers, as they're most commonly known. So if I can have the next slide. With Obama's expansion of family residential centers in 2014 to hold Central American women and children, scholars are rushing to understand this iteration of detention. Centers such as Dilley, Burks, and Carnes have largely been conceived as a contemporary phenomenon. However, alternatives to detention date back to at least the early 1970s. Next slide. As early as at least the 1970s, detention was designed as one of the responses to deal with the growing numbers of women, using it as a form of deterrence. But this presented a unique problem in the cases of women and children who were migrating in increasing numbers. Contrary to popular belief, these proposals did not come from high-ranking immigration officials, but activists themselves. Chicano activists, for example, made suggestions about how to resolve the undue hardship on apprehended women and children by proposing, slide please. This privilege might also, that a new facility be established by the Border Patrol in San Diego County that will accommodate special cases involving apprehended juveniles. This privilege might also be considered for women in particular circumstances. The present Border Patrol Detention Center in Chula Vista accommodates only men. So this is a powerful example of the ways that more detention centers were being called into existence, first in the name of children and then women, and that such facilities would be considered privileges. Last slide, please. Established 5 years after this report, the bulk of this talk examines Casa San Juan, the first known alternative detention center and current model for family residential centers. I analyzed Casa San Juan to track the evolving logics around vulnerable populations that has led to the expansion of detention through the development of specialized facilities. In this way, Casa serves as an origin story that sought to protect the earliest categories of vulnerable migrants, women and children, before this logic was applied to transgender migrants. And for those of you who may not be familiar, transgender pods are units that were developed to contain migrants segregated from the larger detention facilities, or in some cases like the Cibola Detention Center, the entire facility is designated for LGBTI migrants and referred to as a pod. In terms of method, I'm an interdisciplinary scholar that draws on archival materials and analyzes them using queer and transgender frameworks. In the case of my work on Casa San Juan, I created my own archive. I have privileged research that I obtained to gain unprecedented access to the facility. I gathered government contracts, photographed the site, produced original interviews with the Catholic Charities executive director and program manager, as well as with 2 formerly detained migrants. And it was very kind of by chance that this so happened that the time when I was doing the field work, the facility had just closed. And so it became accessible archivally in ways that it wouldn't have been had it still been operating. So from these sources, I make two arguments. One, that ICE depends on alternative institutions like Casa San Juan to insulate itself from human rights violations by effectively subcontracting humane treatment. Secondly, that alternative detention centers are central actors in the broader ecology of incarceration facilities that constitute and legitimate each other. In other words, the term alternative is a misnomer. It tries to signal a distinction as separate from other facilities, but in fact, these facilities work together to legitimate each other so that alternative and private institutions are illuminating a spectrum of detention violence, right? Slide, please. So whereas private detention facilities like Otay are located at the outskirts of San Diego, San Isidro Industrial and Commercial District, Casa San Juan was located on a residential street in North Park in San Diego, California, in a neighborhood known for its art, music, and food. Casa San Juan first opened its doors in July of 1982 to provide short-term housing for women and children being held as material witnesses in alien smuggling cases. Casa was owned by Catholic Charities Diocese of San Diego and had contracts with both the U.S. Marshal Service and ICE. The average length of stay was about 2 to 3 weeks. In general, residents left the facility when they were no longer needed for their case or were released on bond with friends and family for the duration of their case. One of the key features used to promote Casa San Juan was its home-like appeal due to its location in a residential neighborhood, as well as the features of its house, of the house itself. And so here you kind of get a sense of like, this is the street view. Across the street is like the DMV, Hillcrest, which is like the very LGBTQ neighborhood is right across the corner. So it's very unlike where detention centers are usually placed. If I can have the next slide, please. So this is a floor plan of the facility itself. You can see here that the house itself has 2 stories. It has a dining room, a living room, patio, bedrooms, right? The upstairs had a classroom where they had large classes for children and a library that included fiction and legal materials for migrant women to read. The hallways were narrow and very white. They did have religious iconography in the living space, although they tried to provide a range of religious materials, not just Catholic materials. And I'd be happy to talk more about the environment or like the makeup of the house if there's any questions about that. Let's go to the next slide, please. This is the 2nd floor. So you can see 7 bedrooms, all kind of next to each other, and about 14 beds. And there's the teacher's office. And these teachers came in from like the city of San Diego itself, who subcontracted teachers to come in and give lectures to the children. Slide, please. So under the cover of home, the existence of Casa San Juan was facilitated by arguments by Catholic Charities Director, Program Manager, and ICE as an alternative space that could appropriately accommodate women and children. In my interviews with program officials, they emphasized their mission as a humanitarian organization. The home-like qualities Casa San Juan and welcoming staff proclaimed were ways to neutralize concerns over the detention of women and children by shoring up evidence of the kind and humane treatment. In particular, they highlight their superiority as a humane institution by frequently comparing it to other detention facilities such as Otay. In this way, CASA is a critical site to examine administrative violence. CASA's projection as a neutral place that conducts the normal order of things obscures the violence of confinement by weighing them against what could be the worst case scenario, and in doing so, that enabled its existence for more than 50 years. When I spoke with the director of Catholic Charities, he described two main issues with other detention facilities. One, their use of detention as deterrence, and two, the treatment of migrants as threats and profits. When it comes to migrant treatment, the director states, they see people as profit and prioritize security. There's a way of thinking of people as cost, as threats. In contrast, the director and manager highlighted that the mission of CASA was to prioritize human connection. These comparisons to other facilities, to extraordinary violence, is a critical example of the ways that CASA sought to distinguish itself and legitimate itself as appropriate and a humane institution. And the mission of Catholic Charities was a central part of that narrative. Having discussed the ways that CASA was conceptualized by its officials, I want to turn to migrant interviews that expose the intense regulation and bodily control they were subjected to, as well as the ways they were made vulnerable for removal and expulsion. Migrant interviews described Casa San Juan as a highly structured institutional environment. Upon entry, migrants were interviewed for intake process, forced to turn in their belongings in exchange for uniforms. These uniforms matched their room assignments, and I can give you a sense of it. So in this slide, you can see these are the bunk beds and the room numbers that they were assigned to. These rooms were often overcrowded. And so you can see and actually a report by the City of San Diego Planning Commission, they found that the facility had to keep getting warned about the overcrowding that they were facing, not unlike other detention facilities. Daily life at Casa San Juan was structured by a rigid schedule. Sleeping, showering, meal times, chores, and recreational activities were all timed activities. This was one of the most significant ways migrants described feeling like they were in a prison. One of the migrant women I interviewed noted the kindness of the cook in providing an abundance of food, but then caveated this memory by saying, who knows who he was, but anyways, no dejaba de ser cárcel. It didn't stop being a jail. If I can go to next slide. And one more. I'm not used to having, I'm doing my own clicking, sorry. I think, yeah, that's good. Okay. So in a report to the Planning Commission, when CASA officials describe the security of the institution, they state residents are kept occupied with structured classes, recreation, meals, and so forth. The very features used to pitch the facility as home-like residents were now being used to assure security. The status of this institution as a perceived refuge from other detention facilities led to the development of a strict criteria of who could qualify, making it exclusive and not an option offered to all female migrants in detention. Referrals to Casa San Juan were highly subjective and discretionary administrative decisions by U.S. Marshals, ICE, and CASA officials. U.S. Marshals and ICE primarily conducted their own screening and recommendations for who should be transferred to Casa San Juan. In the case of U.S. Marshals, this was based on who would be the strongest witness in cases of human trafficking and were offered as a kind of plea agreement to migrants who were caught crossing the border. There's a slide, please. So these are the kind of main criteria, right? Pregnant women or women with children under 18, boys who were under 8, who were 13 and under and looked their age. Looking their age was a very interesting concept that kept coming up in part of the way that they were just like segregating the facility itself, because there were concerns that if boys looked older, that somehow that created like concerns around sexuality within the facility itself. And so then the idea that they were vulnerable was didn't apply to them because they looked beyond their age. Slide. With their strict criteria, CASA produced a bifurcation and classification of the criminally illegal alien and the vulnerable migrant population. It made the assertion that humane treatment was considered a privilege for a select few. In other words, this criteria suggested at least two things. First, that those who don't qualify are criminal and subject to a court and punishment. This, of course, is a gendered assessment that marks men, queer, and transgender migrant as criminal, and women and children as victims. Secondly, the absence of trans women and queer migrants at Casa San Juan implies that there were narrow definitions of who women were and who could be considered a vulnerable population. The idea that Casa was a superior facility due to its decent food, bedding, and general respect for migrant humanity led the program manager to conclude that being at Casa was a privilege and used that privilege as a disciplinary mechanism by threatening migrants of their potential transfer to another facility. The privilege of being at Casa was reinforced by the threat of experiencing the true force of immigration enforcement. With its absence of the milieu of armed guards or cells, common in private detention facilities, Casa was reinforced in other ways. The director explained, slide. It wasn't the staff keeping people in, it was here's your choice. Walk out the door and immigration's gonna get you, so no guards. On the one hand, we hear the ways Casa officials relied on moralizing language used to discipline migrants. And on the other hand, they're also minimizing their role in keeping people locked in by situating ICE as the real threat. Thus, Casa relied on the threat of deportation that a migrant departure of the program would trigger as a form of security. Casa was reinforced both by the privilege of the facility and the force of immigration enforcement. In its more than 50 years of operation, only 5 people abandoned the building. ICE and US Marshals depended on Casa San Juan's existence, not out of a genuine concern for the welfare of migrants, but to insulate itself from critiques of conditions, of abusive conditions. So the existence of Casa was a power move. The Casa's director was well aware that the government used them, as he states, a good cop, bad cop kind of thing. You can go here or you can go there. So in this way, alternative detention centers are not exceptional spaces, but central actors in the broader ecology of carceral institutions. And so I'll just kind of stop there because I'm at time, but basically the idea of this presentation is to think about how is immigration authorities using this idea of gender responsive approaches to expand its detention power at a moment where it's being questioned, whether they should and can detain people appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Hinda Saif from UIS. We just saw a slide up there that you probably didn't have time to talk about, and that talked about trans detention. So could you speak a bit to that for us? Thank you.
Sure, of course. So one of the things that happens after the mid-1990s because of changes to immigration policy that required the mandatory detention of asylum seekers is we see an increase detention of transgender migrants. A lot of the concerns that activists put forward were that they were being placed in detention facilities based on their sex assigned at birth and not their gender affirmation, right? And so this made them vulnerable to violence, both from officials and also from other migrants in these facilities. And so in response to activists pushing for their release, they developed special facilities, and these are those transgender pods, which has been the kind of new development to say, we're now, look at how they actually launched this campaign around Cibola, which was one of the facilities created for transgender migrants specifically. And so ICE developed a Twitter campaign, and they invited the press to come and tour the facility. So look at our basketball courts and look at the pink walls and look at the transgender migrants and all of their birthday cards and libraries and classrooms to show how well they were able to affirm transgender care. But what they didn't do was actually allow them to talk to the migrants themselves, who were still reporting high levels of violence and sexual assault, even in Cibola. So, these conditions haven't gone away. And actually the queer and transgender migrant population have been some of the most staunch criticisms of abolition of detention facilities altogether, and have argued away from, we don't want special facilities, we want the end of detention altogether, right? And so, yeah.
Good afternoon, buenas tardes. My name is Betsy Serrano, and it's an honor to be here and to be invited to this special and important event. I recently graduated from UIS, and right now I'll be presenting Dr. Nida Bredas Gracia. But first I'll be reading her biography. Dr. Nia Ruedas Gracia is an assistant professor of educational psychology at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Ruedas Gracia earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, in psychology and sociology, a Master of Arts degree from New York University, NYU in human development and social intervention, and a PhD from Stanford University in developmental and psychological sciences. Her research interests include exploring sociocultural factors such as sense of belonging that impact the academic performance and psychological development of historically minoritized students. She is also interested in informing and developing culturally sustaining interventions for historically minoritized college students, specifically those who are first-generation low-income FLI. Please help me welcome Dr. Nidia Ruedas Gracia.
Hello, everybody. Let me get positioned here. I'm going to start timing myself because I can talk forever. So I need a visual reminder of how much I got. All right. So thank you again for the great introduction. My name is Dr. Nidia Ruedas Gracia. Today I want to talk about sense of belonging and how sense of belonging can be used as both a tool to foster belonging and increase positive life outcomes, can also oftentimes serve as a powerful mechanism of exclusion and a powerful signal of non-belonging. So we can click next on here. I'll try my best to remember to hit next or tell y'all to hit next. Got it. So first I wanted to introduce myself because I'm about to talk for a long time. So you might as well know who's talking to you. So you heard a little bit about my research background. I just kind of went back and forth across the United States. I did UCLA for undergrad, and then I went to New York for NYU for grad school. And then I said the West Coast is the best coast. So I went back over to California, to Stanford for my PhD. And then I ended up in Champaign, Illinois. So I'm living my best Midwest life. And the weather is being nice to me this winter. We'll see in January how this goes. Click next, please. And I put some pictures here that I think are pretty important to who I am, and it'll probably help you understand a little bit more when I talk about some of these signals of non-belonging. So I identify as Mexican American. So I have this Mexican American kind of mosh posh photo over here on the left. I really like it because it kind of showcases how I am a mix of two cultures, but yet there are pretty clear lines between the two. And so that's kind of how I navigate life, where oftentimes my culture is a mix of these two cultures, but then oftentimes I'm told or I see very clear distinctions between the two cultures and where I'm not supposed to do things or supposed to do things. So I like that image, but it also reminds us of kind of my biculturalism. So I am a child of immigrants. My mom is from Mexicali, Mexico, and my dad's from Zacatecas, Mexico. Mexicali and Calexico. She was back and forth. So if anybody is familiar with border towns, my whole family is in that area. I also have a photo of In-N-Out. So I have a very important question. Okay, we are in the Midwest. All right. So raise your hand if you've had In-N-Out and like it. Yes. All right, we're good. Raise your hand if you've had Shake Shack and like it. Okay. And apparently in Texas, Whataburger. So does anybody have Whataburger? Apparently that's a thing, right? I was doing another keynote in Texas and they were like, it's all about Whataburger. And I was like, F, you fail. I'm leaving. So fun fact is that I am from Baldwin Park, California, which is in Los Angeles County. And that's where the first In-N-Out was made. So that's my claim to fame of where I'm from. But that's about it. That's all we got. So In-N-Out. And that's why I get really excited when people raise their hand and say they like it. And then that's me with a donut because I'm always snacking. I think it's an important part of who I am. Food is really important, not just to me, but to my family. Oftentimes the way that we show love is to make sure you're fed or overfed, but don't ever tell us that we're overfeeding. You just take whatever we give you. I also have a photo here of a volleyball. So I do like to play volleyball. It gets hard in the winter time, and I haven't done it in quite a bit, but growing up, I played a lot of volleyball, and it just kind of helped de-stress and get some physical activity. And sometimes I'll get fellow volleyball fans, enthusiasts in the group, and then we can make a volleyball team or something. And then up top, I have a photo of me and my mom, and that kind of signifies the family-oriented side of me. So family is very important. And throughout college, throughout all of my academic endeavors, I've made sure to explicitly state that family was a priority. And so I was actually able to customize a lot of my undergrad and graduate education to make sure that everybody from my advisor to the program knew if there's something that has to go, that I need to do family-wise, I need to be able to work from home or be able to travel and have funds to travel back to mom. So that's a little bit about me. Let's click next. Yeah. All right. So I won't repeat you give an excellent introduction. These are the two buckets of research that I do. The first one is more exploring and trying to see what the experience is among different groups. The second bucket is more applied, using that knowledge to inform interventions, programs, and policies. And if you click next there, for today, we're going to focus on that one bucket. So I'm going to try to give some examples of experiences that students may or may not have that can influence their well-being and performance. Great, thanks. Next, please. So first off, I wanted to bring up sociocultural theory. If anybody's heard of Vygotsky, that's where this is coming from. Let me close this before I break something. And a lot of things were said during sociocultural theory, and if you read through it, there are a lot of things, but I wanted to pick out one thing in particular. Cognitive development is largely influenced by one's surrounding cultures. So it's really important to understand that as students, they are learning not in a vacuum, they're learning with a lot of things happening in their environment. And so it is not, I guess, holistic thinking to focus on the student and just the vacuum, but you must also look at the environment and the cultural background of that student, but also the culture that they're in. Next, please. So specifically, I'll be talking about, well, all of y'all know, sense of belonging, but it's a really difficult concept, and I think it'll be why I'll have a job for many, many years, because even Michelle Obama has a hard time talking about it or specifically putting her finger on it, right? So in her book, she mentions, it's hard to put into words, but sometimes you pick up in the ether, the quiet, cruel nuances of not belonging, the subtle cues that tell you to not risk anything, to find your people and just stay put. And I think we've gotten notions of that throughout the previous presentations as well. There's something about this feeling that you get that you're just supposed to stay put and stay with your people and not go out and explore. And she didn't really know how to put her finger on it. Next, please. So researchers said, bet, we'll try. So there are a lot of definitions, but I wanted to focus on one here. A sense of belonging is the experience of personal involvement in a system or environment so that persons feel themselves to be an integral part of that system or environment. So generally, that's what it is. Next, please. And then you might want to click like 4 times. Yeah, thanks. So sense of belonging is important for all of these things. And if you don't believe me, you can read these articles here that I've cited. There is just a lot of empirical evidence that something like sense of belonging, something that Michelle Obama had a hard time talking about and really placing her finger on, has a lot of impact on our lives, and not just educationally, but also in terms of motivation and well-being. Thanks. Next. So importantly, and I'll come back to this later, sense of belonging is also context dependent. So you can have a different level of sense of belonging depending on the different contexts that we're talking about. And so you can have a sense of belonging to your school. So a lot of us, if you went to like a formal education system, wherever in or out of the United States, you had some type of school that you were a part of. And you could have a high sense of belonging to that or a low sense of belonging to that. And more specifically, for those of us who kept going to school, we also went to some type of university or institution of higher education. So we also had a chance to develop a sense of belonging in that sense as well. You can also have a sense of belonging to your country or to the country that you're in at the moment, right? And that's different than your sense of belonging to your university. And you can have a high sense of belonging in one context to your university and a low sense of belonging in another context, say your country. You can also have a sense of belonging to your race or ethnicity, and that could be high or low. Some of us may feel a strong sense of belonging to our race or ethnicity. Some maybe not so much, and that can maybe depend on a lot of experiences and just kind of things that have happened or how we've been received by our race or ethnicity. So you can have a sense of belonging to lots of different things. Next, please. Now, because I wanted to talk about students, I wanted to just quickly post here the definition for sense of university belonging. So pretty similar to the general definition that I gave, but I italicized some pretty important words here. And I'm about to give some examples. And so you'll see how these important words like connectedness, acceptance, respect, value, and mattering really, really influence how we feel in terms of our sense of belonging. Next, please. You might want to click a couple times again. Thanks. See, we're connected. All right. So as you may have kind of assumed, sense of university belonging also has impacts on these very important things. So when you're thinking about college students, their sense of belonging to this context that they're in, AKA their university, is very important for not only their grades and whether they graduate, but for their psychological well-being. And again, just like generally sense of belonging has a lot of evidence that it's important for these things, specifically sense of university belonging, there's also a lot of evidence that it's important for all of these very important things. So I threw in some citations there if you want to check them out. Next, please. Let's click one more time. Yeah, that way I can talk while y'all read. So I wanted to put sociocultural theory and sense of belonging together in these examples that I want to give in a bit. So I wanted to remind us, because I think that we've all kind of seen this happen, that sense of university belonging can be influenced by signals of belonging outside of the university. So sense of belonging for the university is not just contained within that formal institution, but there can be things that happen outside of the institution that can influence the student's university belonging. And with that, because I wanted to focus on students from minoritized groups, same thing here. Students from minoritized groups can have their belonging influenced by things outside of the university. And it's important to understand these signals and how they operate, because especially if you're trying to build or foster a sense of belonging for college students, you might want to understand a little bit about history and where these students are coming from so that you can know how to adequately address and assess this. Next, please. All right, so I'm going to talk about some signals of non-belonging. And these might be a little bit, just disclaimer, these might be a little bit hard to listen to, especially if it's new to you. So I just wanted to, let y'all know that it might make some of us uncomfortable. It always makes me uncomfortable because it's not fun to talk about these things. But I think that just because they're not fun to talk about, it doesn't mean that we don't. So I wanted to highlight some of these examples because they're actively also happening now, and they can serve as examples of signals of non-belonging for our college students now. Next, please. So when I was thinking, which signals of non-belonging do I want to talk about? And again, I am a scholar in the United States, so I'm restricted. I should try harder to look at other countries. But a lot of my work on college students has focused on college students in the United States. And these are some things that have been happening in the past, years, decades, centuries, that have influenced how these students think about their place in this country, but also their place in the university setting. So I just listed a bunch here, and part of my reason for it is if you're unfamiliar with any of these, you could Google a bunch of these and get a lot of information about what these were and how they impact the students. So I didn't want to just focus on my examples, but I wanted to give some extra ones here so that we could look at them. And then on this side over here, my left, your right, Zoomsters, I'm not sure which side, but anyways, this one right here. I put a lot of things in quotation. So these happenings, these policies, these programs, these things that happen over time give off these signals that say, you don't belong here. Your kind doesn't belong here. You're not valued here. The way that you're living, what you're doing, it's wrong. You can also have microaggressions. You're competing for limited resources, and I put that in quotations because oftentimes they're not really limited in the ways that we're kind of told they are, but it kind of supports this competition between different minoritized groups. So I have a lot of examples there, but I do want to focus on just a couple, and they're going to focus on different groups. So I want to just kind of give those examples, and then we'll wrap them up. I promise it'll all make sense by the end of my keynote. Next, please. Ooh, one more click. One more click. Cool. So first I wanted to talk about some signals of non-belonging for Chinese and Chinese Americans. So in 1882, one of the first significant laws restricting immigration into the United States took effect. This was essentially a 10-year ban on Chinese laborers immigrating to the United States. And then later on in 1942, after the attacks on Pearl Harbor in the United States, the US set up what they called relocation centers that were actually internment camps where they forced Japanese and Japanese American residents on the West Coast of the United States. They were given only a 48-hour advance notice and consequently lost land, personal possessions, homes, generational wealth, all of that cut off. And while these moments in history are mostly talked about in the history books and in the history field, and I'm not a historian, so my historian friends that are watching this, I'm so sorry. And maybe we can collaborate on a future keynote to make sure that I get all of this. But each of these are a whole class of information. So I'm just swooping it into 2 bullets here. So while they are mostly talked about in history field, history books, they are also important in the psychological and educational sense. After all, many Chinese, Chinese American, Japanese Americans in and out of the United States are familiar with these stories, are familiar with this history, and it can influence their relationship with the United States, with institutions of higher ed here in the United States, and others. So if the 1800s and 1900s, or since the 1800s and 1900s, the United States told these 2 groups of people, they don't belong here. So this is an example of this signal of non-belonging. And many students now that identify with these groups ask themselves these questions still now, right? If they did that back then, do I belong now? Do they accept me now? And those are constant questions that are psychologically taxing and can influence a lot of decision-making processes for students. Next, please. Ooh, 2 clicks. Nice, all right. Well, not nice. Neither of these programs were nice. So some other examples that I have are the Jim Crow era and the era of the Bracero program. So these are another couple of examples of non-belonging. From the end of the Civil War until 1968, a collection of state and local statutes around the United States legalized racial segregation. These statutes marginalize African Americans by denying them the right to vote, have jobs, get an education, go to college, and more. It was a clear message that African Americans were not valued, respected, or accepted in the United States. During the same period, the Bracero program surfaced in the Western and Southwestern United States. On the surface, it seemed like a great initiative that allowed Mexican laborers to temporarily come to the United States, and they were all kind of in agricultural type of jobs. There was a shortage of agricultural workers, mostly due to how difficult and physically taxing the jobs were. The United States wanted to fill those jobs and in exchange guaranteed a minimum wage, health insurance, I believe, and safe free housing. However, these promises fell short. Wages were paid late or not paid at all, and housing was subpar. There was very little agency or control over the situation for Mexicans. And it was a clear message that Mexicans were seen as people that could be used to fill a need without being respected or treated fairly. So both African American and Mexican populations now are very aware of how these eras and the history, and this history lives on. And it influences the way that Mexicans and African Americans are treated now. So even though technically these eras are over, a lot of kind of policies and practices that were utilized during that time have spilled over and still exist today. Again, strong signals of non-belonging, right? So if you don't identify with these groups, just try to imagine this happening to your grandparents and how you would feel about the space now. All right, click. I need to take you with me for future keynotes because you got it. All right. So more specifically for Latinx immigration, I wanted to focus on this. So DACA is not only for Latinos and Latinx immigrants, but I wanted to focus on these two because they're also things that are in flux now. So you might be like, that's in the past, Nydia. There's no more Bracero program. Well, there's things that are still happening now. So the DACA program, so DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It allows non-US citizens to work in the US and are specifically designed for young people who came to the United States as children. It doesn't grant them citizenship or lawful permanent residence. And also it's constantly in flux. It's also very expensive to renew your DACA membership. And some are even, you can renew it every 2 years. Some are renewing it sooner than that, paying the extra fines because you just don't know what's going to happen in the governments and stuff. I'll never work for any of that because I don't understand it, but it's in flux, right? And it could get struck down at any time. So again, the United States through its policies reminds different groups, and particularly for those who identify as Mexican who are DACA members, this sounds very much like a Bracero program, right? They're allowed to work here, they're not citizens, and I can take it away at any time. It reminds different groups that they don't belong, and in this case, like the Bracero program, that groups are visitors in this space. On this side, I just quickly threw in some things that have been happening very, very recently. So you have this idea of a physical wall separating different groups. So again, this signal of non-belonging, who belongs on this side, who belongs on that side? Do you look like you belong over here, or do you look like you belong over there? And we're gonna make a physical signal of non-belonging. There's also Title 42, which was used to block entry of migrants due to disease. So they use kind of the COVID pandemic as a reason to block entry. I don't know where it is right now. They might have already struck it down, but it was a thing to add on to our stress from the COVID pandemic. And then there's ESCOM, which is so local police were for many years encouraged to cooperate in terms of deportation, but with ESCOM, it was made a requirement for local police to cooperate in terms of deportation. So finding people who were undocumented or just kind of moving the process along for deportation. Let's hit next. Oh yeah, you already see. I have to take it with me, right? He already clicked next. He felt it. All right. So I wanted to explain this figure here because it also kind of, I want to remind us, and I really loved the presentations earlier today because as y'all were talking, I was like, yes, my flower. So this is a flower. If you can't tell it's a flower, don't tell me because I worked really hard on it. So there's petals. Those things are petals. And some of them are lined solid, some of them are dashed, and some of them are gray, and some of them are darker gray. So this is a flower, those are petals. And then the R stands for race, the G stands for gender, and the S stands for socioeconomic status. Those are just 3 social identities that one individual can identify with. And that's why I put more petals, because we can identify with many more social identities. And then you see there's kind of overlaps, like you see the R and the G is overlapping, you have R times G. And that's kind of reminding us that you can have an experience, you can have a sense of belonging that's influenced and impacted by how you're treated because of your race and your gender at the same time, right? So we see this a lot with like Kimberly Crenshaw in the law world, where she was teasing apart your experience in the workplace, being a Black woman versus a Black man. You can't really tease out the Black and the woman, right? They kind of work together and color your experience in a different way. So that's one example of the R times the G. And then similarly, you can have like a G times S, or you can have an R times S, right? You can have 2 social identities kind of working, playing at the same time in terms of your experience. And then at the bottom there, we have the core, the holistic individual, where all of those petals come together, and your experience is colored and impacted by how society treats all of these social identities that you identify with. And sometimes it can be hard to tease it out. So next. All right, so just how you can have different social identities, college students have also different social identities. So all of these programs, policies, practices that are signaling non-belonging for, say, Mexican and Mexican Americans will influence your students that identify as Mexican, Mexican American, or Latinx, right? But it's also going to influence them differently based on gender and socioeconomic status. So these policies and practices, it's important to understand what type of person were they impacting, and not just in terms of race or ethnicity, but also gender and socioeconomic status. But the other thing, lots of arrows and connections and Venn diagrams, because the other thing is that, remember how I mentioned that sense of belonging, you can have sense of belonging to different contexts? Well, those can inform each other too. So if you have a low sense of belonging to, say, this country that you're living in, if you're constantly looking, you know, at the news and they're constantly attacking people of your race or people of your gender or people of your socioeconomic status, that can trickle over and spill over into your sense of belonging to your university, your sense of belonging to your workplace, your sense of belonging to your family. And so I put just some arrows because it just looked really messy when I did all of the arrows, but just imagine a lot of arrows going all over, because these are all interconnected. And so we really have to think about, like Vygotsky, reminding ourselves that not only does every individual have different social identities, but they're also influenced by their sense of belongings to all these different contexts. Next, please. All right, so then signals of belonging, right? I kind of went through some examples of exclusion that could contribute to signals of non-belonging, but I wanted to do that because I feel like that's how you adequately understand how signals of belonging can also be used for optimal student success. So the environment matters. Our understanding of history and the place that this individual or this group of students has in the space can really influence their sense of belonging and how we address it and how we support. And we can really harness the environment and the society to foster a sense of university belonging. So we can be mindful of history and how history has wronged a lot of groups and how people may have felt a sense of non-belonging. And we can use that to, one, not repeat history, which is really hard. We're really hard at, like, as humans, it's really hard for us to not repeat history. But we can address it and we can say, we understand that this happened before. And in this setting, it's not going to happen. Or at least I understand what you're going through and I'm validating that just because you're here as a college student doesn't mean that you're not impacted by policies and practices that are happening outside of the university. Let's see. Yeah. So my conclusion is just to think about the flower, because I spent a lot of time on it. And not just the flower, but also all those arrows, because when we really want to think about the academic performance and psychological well-being of college students, especially diverse college students, there are a lot of arrows, there are a lot of petals that are overlapping, and that can feel overwhelming. Like, okay, I have to put a policy in place, but now there's all these arrows and all these petals, and now I'm overwhelmed and I can't possibly help everybody, right? Yeah, you could feel like that. But another way to think about it is that that means there are plenty of opportunities to intervene. There are plenty of opportunities to support. You can look at one of those overlaps and focus on that. There are just plenty of ways that we can help, and being aware of how colorful we all are and how beautiful we are as flowers can really help us truly understand how to foster success of our students. So thank you so much. Hopefully that was helpful. I'm always happy to talk about these. Thank you.
For this work. And I just want to make a comment in support of the work that you're doing. You know, when I look around this room, I'm the only African-American woman in here. And that's okay, but it's not okay too, with what you want us to think about. Because when it comes to a sense of belonging, you know, I've been an academic for almost 30 years, and I taught in California, Arizona, and now here I'm back into my own home space because I'm originally from Chicago. But it's been, as part of my journey, is I've oftentimes been the only one. And this is for the last 30 years or so. So this is not a complaint. It's an acknowledgement for the work that you're doing. And since I've been here, everyone has been so kind to me. You know, I have sisters that I didn't even know I had. Everyone's just been wonderful and really welcoming. But we need more of me. You know, we need more people of all different colors if we're going to teach colors and shapes and sizes. And I know I sound like I'm talking as if I'm in third grade, but in some ways we are in third grade, you know, when it comes to the importance of this work. Belonging for us, as well as being able to model that behavior so that students see. So what they see is different and inclusive. So I really just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for your marvelous, marvelous work.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. And as you mentioned, it's okay, but not okay, right? And so something that I tell my students, and hopefully this is helpful to them when they are the only one in the room, is that, you know, along the lines of the work that I do and the work that I presented here, in 2023, it is no longer your fault, right? There are way too many Black women, intelligent Black women who want to be in academia for 30 plus years, right? There are too many diverse students that want to be in these spaces that are not, and it's not for reasons of their own. And so I think that that's also important to validate for students and for people who want to be in academia, because sometimes it can feel like it's something about my racial group or my ethnic group or my gender, something about us that we don't fit in. But I think in you know, now in 2023, it's no longer a problem of the individual, it's a problem of the system and the institution and the policies that have been in place. And so I think that's sometimes, at least it calms me a little bit, because when I'm the only one in the room, I also think about like, it's not me or my people, it's this system. And I remain in the system because I want it to change. But it's not easy being the only one in the room. But thank you so much for your comment. That means a lot to me and the work of my lab and the work that we're doing. Thank you. Yeah.
In laying the groundwork for this new institute on race, gender, sexuality, and social justice. And, you know, we are laying the tracks down. And one of the things that is really encouraging to me is that people like you, your work, this is a place where your work is welcomed. We need to hear about that because it's really helping us to determine what else is going on out here in academia and how, as we organize and institute this institute, you know, what kind of foci we should have. So I wanted to say again, thank you. And I just want to make a second comment. And I promise I will not dominate.
No, thank you. I'm going to find you. I will email you. All right. Thank you. Oh, yes. Okay.
Hi, thank you. I'm Miriam Wallace. I'm newly here at the University of Illinois Springfield as the new dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences. And I'm here, so one of the things I really appreciated about your talk was the way that you made us think about the larger context in which everything sits. So it's not just what we do in our classrooms or what we do in our colleges or what we do on our university campuses, but we sit in this larger ecosystem. And I will just say that I moved to Illinois because this was a great job, and also because the ecosystem in which we sit here, if not perfect, is better than where I was coming from, which was in Florida. And I was in fact
Welcome
at
to the
College
Midwest.
of Florida.
Yes.
But I guess what I'm thinking about is, I wonder if you had thoughts about the ways that maybe even in a hostile, larger environment, places like universities, colleges, classrooms, libraries can kind of be a haven, because I've just heard so many stories about, I found myself in the library, I found myself in the classroom, this teacher gave me a book, this teacher looked like me, and that became a place where I suddenly felt that I belonged, and that changed the relationship to that larger ecosystem. So that was my thought.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So there are some amazing scholars that do work around like subcultures and counter spaces. And so there's a lot of theory work on that, but also a lot of empirical evidence that there can be spaces within these larger places that can serve as havens or safe places. And since you said you're the dean, right? So you have access to some money. So I'm gonna say this. So I think that because there are these subcultures and counter spaces that kind of organically can come up, and because it can be so difficult for us as faculty, staff, and administration to pinpoint them and know where they're at, you kind of almost need like an undergrad consultant, right, to kind of tell you where all these things are. Because it's so hard, I think that's why it's also important to fund these various mechanisms and fund these different spaces where this could organically come up, right? Give them a chance to come up, because they can be the safe haven, they can be that saving grace for a lot of students. So funding them, I think, is really important in university settings. And you will see for every university, because every university has a different flavor and has a different student body, you'll have different subcultures and safe spaces come up. So I think it's important to, and most of these safe spaces and counter spaces struggle with funding and are oftentimes student-led. And it's just very difficult. I don't know how undergrads do it, to create these spaces over time and really fight for funding. So hey, Dean, thanks for coming. Fund the things.
Dr. Ruedas, congratulations, a great presentation. about important concepts, not only relevant for our students, but also for everyone in general. But what I want to ask is a term that, not being a social scientist, I'm a hard science professor. But you know, when I started seeing in the literature the term Latinx, I felt uncomfortable with it. And you even use that term in your presentation. Isn't that labeling people that they don't belong to the general population? And therefore is a term that shouldn't be used. And in fact, some time ago, I noticed there are articles of people, even university authorities around the country, banning the term Latinx. So I really would like to hear your comments about this term. In my view, it should be eliminated and not even used, because it gives you that feeling of not belonging to society. We appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. We talk about this in my class. It always takes up the whole 3 hours, and we got to have like a long lunch / dinner to go through all of the nuances of it, but I'll try to be concise. Words matter, and they're very powerful, and they can signal, like you mentioned, belonging or non-belonging. They also change over time, depending on cultural shifts and depending on, again, how society is thinking of different things. So I guess before Latinx, there's Latino and Latina, which are also exclusionary terms. And so Latina excludes male identifying, Latino excludes female identifying. A lot of times when there's, we know that it's Latina until there's one male in the room, then it's Latino. So now the females are silenced, or they can feel silenced. Latino and Latina also doesn't take into account non-binary or trans communities or queer communities. And so Latinx has developed as a next term. There's also Latina, because there are also issues with Latinx. So I am not one to pick one or the other, but I do kind of make sure that I understand as much as I can the progression of these terms, why they're changing, who they're including and excluding, and in my context, what is the term. So depending on what university I'm at, so I'm collaborating at a university in the East Coast, and they use Latinx almost exclusively. It's a smaller school, and they, in their kind of culture, in their kind of society and their group, they seem very comfortable with Latinx. They don't seem very comfortable with Latina or Latina, Latino. And so within that context, on our surveys, when we're collecting data and all of that, that's the term that we use there. And so I try to be very mindful on the context that I'm in and how my students are responding to the different terms. And I think that also one of the petals also is our levels of education. And I always kind of think about what people outside of academic circles think about these terms and which ones they ascribe to, or which ones they are more accepting of. But ultimately, I think I very much agree with your point that each of these terms can be exclusionary. They can be signals of non-belonging. And so I think it's important for us to always be aware that words are powerful. They can signal belonging or non-belonging, and they change over time because people and cultures change over time. So I think that's where we're at right now, where we're wrestling with these terms because we're not completely on the same page about this term specifically. So, it's always kind of worth many conversations and bringing in my family who may not have gone to college. What do they think about these terms? The queer community, what do they think about these terms? The migrant and immigrant community, what do they I mean, some don't even identify as Latino, right? Like they don't like no X, no A, no A, no O. Like I just don't want to be identified as Latino. So you bring up a great point. Words are very powerful, and they change over time, and it's kind of our responsibility to be mindful of how they can or cannot exclude communities. System-wise, I'm not sure. So again, I'm horrible at all the government policy stuff. So I don't know if they've explicitly, I don't know if anybody knows. Oh, oh, okay. But yeah, I can check that though. I don't know exactly if they've systematically. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe not, but yeah, I'll check. Okay, so chat.
There's a chat question from an anonymous attendee. Do you have any research regarding age gaps regarding returning older students? Age adds another discomfort to belonging.
Absolutely. So my published work as of now does not specifically focus on that, but I've been very excited to include that. So you have the idea of, for example, student parents, transfer students. You even have students oftentimes from low SES backgrounds that do the on and off. So they'll work for a semester, save up money, and then go the next semester, and then just do the on and off. There's a lot of different ways of being a college student. And I think the more you digress from the quote unquote traditional college student, and that would include people who are maybe a bit older or have have families and are coming in as first year college students, that can also be a signal of non-belonging, where you're like, thriving in your 30s, and then you come into a class and everybody's 18 years old, right? That's going to make you feel a certain way. And so some ways to support at the university level would be helpful in terms of students who are older. So there is work around, I think, like transfer students, student parents. So there are a lot of amazing scholars that have published on that work, and I want to be like them. So I'm hoping that in the near future, I specifically focus on that group, because they've been in my sample, but I haven't been able to tease them out yet.
Excellent. Please join me to thank Dr.
Thank you
Lidia
all very
Ruedas
much.
Gracia. So welcome back. This has been such a wonderful experience. I think this may be the first major symposium we've had at UIS looking at Mexicans, Mexican Americans, Latinas, Latin Americans. So let's have a round of applause for that, and especially for all of the work that people at I-MMAS have done. I'm not sure why it isn't called I-MMAS, but I like calling it I-MMAS for some reason. But anyway, I wanted to introduce our speakers from our next panel. And that panel is about serving and empowering Mexican, Mexican American, Latino, Latino, Latina, Latina students, history, research, and best practices. Unfortunately, one of our presenters wasn't able to make it today, Dr. Lilia Fernandez. I'll just mention that the University of Illinois is incredibly fortunate that she joined our faculty recently. She's one of the most important historians of Mexican and Latina Chicago. And I'm hoping that we can work with her in the future. So next event, perhaps. But we do have a couple of other amazing speakers. I'll introduce myself, not that I'm one of those amazing people, but I'll first introduce myself. I'm Professor Hinda Saif.
I'm Associate Professor of Sociology and Anthropology at this campus, the University of Illinois Springfield, and also a faculty board member of the University of Illinois Press. I'll mention that Mexicans in Chicago and Mexicans and Latinas generally in the Midwest have been underrepresented in scholarship for a long time, especially if you look at the Mexican immigrant population and the Mexican American and Chicano population. There's been a focus on the West and the Southwest, the places that used to be part of Mexico. This has been changing. We're seeing, I would say, a flowering of research in the last couple of decades. And I'm really proud to be affiliated with the U of I Press because we have a wonderful book series on Latinos in Chicago at the Midwest, which I think has been important in changing this trajectory of marginalizing Latinas in the Midwest. So I'm on their faculty board, and I'm also a team member of the Chicago Monuments Project, Pilsen Latina Legacies. My previous work has followed young undocumented activists born in Mexico and raised in the United States, including the launch of the Coming Out of the Shadows movement. But these days, I'm looking at the ways that Latina artists, especially of Mexican ancestry, are changing the visual face of the city of Chicago. So that's me. We're very fortunate that Dr. Carla Kral is going to be joining us from the University of Colima. Dr. Kral has master's and doctoral degrees in sociocultural anthropology from the University of Kansas. Since 2005, she's worked as a professor and researcher in the University of Colima Department of Pedagogy and as part of the research group, Multidisciplinary Studies in Education, Gender, and Violence. She researches and advises projects about gender education and feminisms in Mexico, migration, interculturality, and inclusion. And her most recent publications are related to the history of the feminist movement in Colima, Mexico, as well as feminist teaching practices. Oops, that means I'm supposed to be finishing up. Feminist teaching practices in higher education in Mexico. After Dr. Kral, we're very fortunate that Dr. Leonard Ramirez is also going to be Zooming in from Chicago. So we have two Zoomers on this panel, but they're definitely worth hanging in there for the Zooms. Dr. Ramirez. Yes. Oh, okay, yes. Dr. Ramirez is an educator and longtime community advocate. His professional and social activism is focused on Latinx community advancement, including educational access and success of Latinx youth and adults. He was among the founders of Latino Youth Alternative High School in Chicago's Pilsen community. For over 30 years, he was the director of the nationally recognized Latin American Recruitment and Educational Services Program, LARES, at University of Illinois, Chicago. He was appointed to the Community Advisory Committee on Higher Education by State Senator Miguel del Valle. Dr. Ramirez has served on various boards, including the Diversifying Faculty Board in the Illinois program for the state of Illinois. Today, he is Policy Vice President of the Illinois Latino Council on Higher Education and a member of the Illinois African American and Latino Higher Education Alliance. But before we get to the panel, I'm going to briefly introduce people who are going to provide remarks to us. And actually, I feel like it's very appropriate in light of Dr. Ruedas Gracia's comments about kind of the unsung heroes that help Latina students feel that they belong on campus. We're going to hear in a moment from Justin Rose, who's an EdD candidate, but also the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at our Diversity Center, and a graduate of UIS. And then we'll hear from Cristian Leon Vallejo, who is the president of the Organization of Latin American Students. And I can't read the list of Latino student organizations that he's a member of because it would take too much time. But when I've talked with my students, they have said that the Diversity Center, my Latina students, the Diversity Center, and the many Latina student orgs that we now have on campus are what help them feel belonging at UIS. So let's first welcome Justin Rose from the Diversity Center.
Right, all right. Can everyone hear me? Good, good. Well, good afternoon. And before I even jump into like the formal remarks, I just want to give Betsy some love right now. Can we give Betsy another round of applause? Like I'm smiling, Betsy's one of my former students. And it's just moments like this where you just get to come back and just be in awe of the amazingness that we all probably got to contribute into to help that happen. And so Betsy, thank you for blessing us with your presence. So that's beautiful. All right, so I am going to use the 3 Bs, be brief, brother. I learned that from one of my great mentors, but I do come with a few remarks that I think are worth sharing towards the work that I-MMAS is doing, but also some of the work that we're doing here at UIS and out of the Diversity Center. So I just want to say, good afternoon and thank you to the I-MMAS committee for allowing us to gather today for this ever important symposium. I'm truly honored to be amongst you all today to share a few remarks. Again, by formal introduction, my name is Justin Rose, personal pronouns he, him, and his. And I have the privilege of serving as our Director of Diversity and Inclusion in the Division of Student Affairs. When asked to speak, I'll be completely honest, my mind went 101 different places. I thought to myself, what could I possibly say in a matter of minutes that would capture the essence and the importance of the work that we're doing today, right? Which is to provide growth and development and vision for our Hispanic, Latinx students, but also to strengthen the pipeline at the secondary, but also post-secondary level and beyond. Because it truly matters when we're talking about educational equity. So I questioned myself, do I stay really heady and talk about the disparate disparities we see nationally when we come to try to build affirming communities to protect the diverse student populations that we see, to not result in chilly climates for our minoritized students? Or do I stay mindful of the adverse but real reality of what's happening, but reach for a form of celebration and success to all of the work that we're doing? To really talk about what it looks like when we do provide resources around prosperity for our HL community. And then how we proactively do that and then foster the welcoming environments that actually strengthen the vitality in the educational systems that we operate in, that also improve the domestic and global workforces that we all enter. But I think even more than that, I wanted to talk about the relationships that are built and the resources shared and how it humanizes the HL students in a world that often erases their history as well as their presence. And so to align my marks and move a lot closer to what I really want to share, which is the latter, I chose to do it because we have a program, we have a resource here on campus, which is our Diversity Center. And so in our Diversity Center, it's made up of a smattering of different resources that runs the gamut from first generation resources all the way to Hispanic, Latinx resources, headed up by my colleague and good friend and brother, Daniel, right there. And we've made it our business to be a resource to those who may need uplift and assistance through big and small crises, but also to be a resource that celebrates identity, embraces difference, and empowers people to see their wholeness. As Dr. Garcia talked about the intersectionality of Kimberly Crenshaw's work, right? To not just see the interlocking of oppressions, but also to see the uplift and the empowerment in which we bring, that we don't have to fragment ourselves. To help everyone see that they have unquestionable, unique, and rich educational talents that are critical to the education success that we want to see. When seeing through this lens, for me, it is the single greatest part about doing this work. Obviously, in the oversimplified version of equity work, students come to our campuses, students come to our campuses, we work to retain them, and then they graduate. However, if we only look through this lens, then you missed out on the richness of building communities that integrate the lives, the lives, the experiences, and cultural backgrounds that play such a salient role in our HL students' lives. At UIS, through my unit, we have a first-generation college student program, the Necessary Steps Mentoring Program, that through this support, retention, engagement, live and learning community, I get to interact with the HL community in very interpersonal ways. Since its creation in 2008, 34% of our student participants have self-identified as persons holding HL identity. Moreover, the average GPA for the students has been 2.67 with the median GPA of 2.79 with the standard deviation of 0.76. So that's pretty good if you just want to capture that in really quickly. And we've also retained, by their 6th year on 150% time, 50% of those students have either graduated or been retained in the pipeline. While the numbers, like I said, are somewhat impressive when compared to national statistics amongst first-generation college students who hold HL identity, what's equally as impressive and notable is the sense of connection, community, belonging, and support I get to come in and build with every day I come into work. I get to attend programs that are relevant and matter to them. I get to engage in important discussions where it runs the gamut from serious life events to other topics that are social, cultural, and just fun in nature. I get to witness them being scholars and mentors to strengthen their campus belonging and support. What I'm able to be a part of essentially is expanding and leveraging their funds of knowledge in our communities and amplifying the voices of the students that are often rendered invisible by the majority. I get to help our students navigate dominant structures that allows them to lead with culture and confidence. For me, it's pretty personal. I believe the cross-cultural opportunities that I get to be a part of only help make this campus community much better and much stronger. But also I get to watch, like I said, manifest the greatness and put the demands on the educational institution that we want to see that goes beyond just access and enrollment and then graduation. It actually recharges me, and it actually recharges us as a team as we get to look forward to making sure that we do the work in efficient, effective, and equitable ways. And so with this notion in mind, I'm grateful for the symposium today, because we not only just get to learn about the good work that's happening domestically and globally, but it also empowers us and reminds us that it's a lot of good work that's already underway. And it's also a lot of roadmaps and on-ramps for us to join the fight. And so I thank you, I-MMAS, for the opportunity to speak. And I'm grateful to be a part of the symposium to learn a little bit more on how to make sure that our campus community is a lot stronger. So thank you.
Hello. Before starting, I'd like to give a shout out to someone in the audience, Carolina. She's the vice president of OLAS this year, and she's really been extremely active and extremely supportive in the success of OLAS this year. So Carolina, thank you for coming. Hello, my name is Cristian Leon Vallejo, and I am a first-generation Mexican-American undergrad student here at the University of Illinois Springfield. But more than that, this academic year, I am also have the privilege of serving as a president of the Organization of Latin American Students, which is a Latin-based and led student organization that has been active on this campus for many years now. During my time here on campus, I have slowly but surely seen an increase in the Latino presence in many ways, ranging from overall enrollment to RSO-held events, and even just in the atmosphere. You can feel the Latino presence growing even just by walking to the student union. And I only hope that this keeps growing and amplifying through the years to come. Having an event like the Symposium on a campus like UAS, that is the smaller campus than all the other U of I campuses, is also a predominantly white institution, is of crucial importance, as not only does it make the Latin population feel seen and allow us opportunities to come together and learn, but also brings a huge opportunity for individuals of other ethnicities, races, and backgrounds to come and learn more about us, as we are an extremely important community that keeps growing and evolving here in this country full of opportunities and freedom. An example of this can be seen through an event that we held at OLAS earlier in the semester called Noche Mexicana. We held this event during Hispanic Latin Heritage Month, and it was a night full of Mexican culture. We brought in traditional Mexican foods, drinks, played loteria, and also had Mexican crafts like papel picado and piñata making. At the end of the day, this event did exactly what I had hoped when coming up with the event idea. I saw people of different cultures coming together to sit, eat, and converse. I saw a Latino student telling his friends from Caucasian and African-American backgrounds who were unsure how to prepare an esquite, which is a Mexican street corn in a cup, that he would guide them through the process of it and show them how to make it even extra tasty. And once the event was over, I received a text message from an attendee stating, and I quote, "Thank you for making this event possible / happen, Christian. I really feel closer to home like I haven't in a while. Gracias." And after receiving this message, I knew that this event, which I had wanted to host as soon as I became president, was a true success. The point of telling the story was to show not only the need for holding more culturally based events on a smaller campus, but also to demonstrate the great outcomes that come from it. We not only want, but need more Latin representation on this campus, as we are a growing population, with the majority of us being far from home, wanting to still stay connected to our roots. Overall, thank you, I-MMAS and UIS, for holding the symposium. Thank you so much to the U of I Mexico program for inviting me to speak here on this crucial topic. And thank you all for being in attendance today, for showing up and listening. It truly means more than you think. Thank you and have a blessed rest of your day.
So we're pulling up the PowerPoint. I'll mention, I'm going to try to show you parts of a digital exhibit. So I'm going to run back there at some point. But why don't I get started? Here we go. Could you just flip to the next slide for a second, please? Yeah. I'm going to dedicate my talk today to an alumnus of University of Illinois, Chicago, Rigo Padilla Perez. People at UIC know him, but my guess is that some people at our other campuses don't know him, and certainly University of Colima. He died last spring, but he was very important in starting the coming out of the shadows movement of undocumented students in this country. And he was born in Mexico. As you could see, they just named a student center after him, but let's think of him during this panel. Thank you. Could you go back, please? So it's been my honor as a faculty member of the University of Illinois system, the flagship higher ed system in the state of Illinois, to help document and promote important Mexicana and Chicana contributions to Chicago, especially for our students. And I want to remind everyone that the Chicago metro area has the second largest Mexican immigrant population in the United States after Los Angeles. So it's incredibly important to document. I'm going to speak today about the Festival de Mujeres 1979. And you might be wondering, why would we be interested in a festival? So I'm going to talk about some of the whys, hows, like how this digital exhibit came to be, and also some of the things that I learned from the research, the original research in doing this digital exhibit. Number 2, next please. So the Festival de Mujeres in 1979 was certainly one of the first street fairs by and for Latinas and especially Mexicanas in Chicago. Next, please. So it took place in the Pilsen neighborhood. And for those of you who don't know Chicago that well, Pilsen has been the heart of the Mexican immigrant Midwest since the 1960s. Early in the history of Chicago, there were a couple of neighborhoods where Mexican immigrants concentrated. And one of them was the near West Side. But when that neighborhood came under the construction ball, they basically destroyed a lot of that neighborhood partly to build UIC, University of Illinois Chicago, and a freeway. A lot of the Mexican immigrants from that multiracial community moved farther west into Pilsen. So that's how Pilsen became the center of Mexican activism and cultural life. Next slide, please. So that's the Pilsen neighborhood. Next. And the festival was significant next because it was organized for a number of reasons. But one is that it was organized by Mujeres Latinas en Acción, translated Latin Women in Action. It was founded in 1973, this organization. And it was actually an early Latina organization in Chicago. It just celebrated its 50th anniversary. And it was remarkable because at the time you did have Chicano and Latino organizations, but it was rare for organizations to, not just see Latinas as mothers and wives, but to look at their own issues that they needed to deal with for themselves as well. So Mujeres Latinas en Acción looked at the whole package, but certainly also looked at the needs of the women and girls in the community. Also, this organization addressed family violence very early. The first battered women's shelter was open in 1974 in the United States, and Mujeres Latinas en Acción was talking about family violence very early on. So I'm saying not just early for Latinas, but for all women in this country. Mujeres Latinas en Acción is the longest Latina organization in continuous existence, not just in Illinois, but in the entire United States. So this year, their 50th anniversary is very important. Lilia Fernandez, Dr. Fernandez, who couldn't make it here, in my opinion, wrote the best history of Mujeres. That's the short name for that organization. It was published in her book, Brown in the Windy City in 2012. It's one chapter. And as you can imagine, a 50-year organization, there's more to say than one chapter. So I'm hopefully building on Dr. Fernandez's work so we can learn more about what this organization has done. So next, please. So other reasons why this festival was important. Well, this was a challenging environment for Latinas to have their own street fair. At the time, when people moved to Pilsen, a lot of the Bohemian community that had lived there was moving out. It was suffering from disinvestment from the city. A lot of factories and industries were leaving the city. So it was not the safest neighborhood. You had a lot of bars, you had drug issues going on, you had gang activity, partly because the youth in the community were basically told that they were not college material, that they were supposed to be manual laborers. They weren't really supported in the regular high school, which is why Dr. Ramirez, I'm not going to speak for him, but he was part of an alternative high school in the neighborhood. So for Latinas, mostly Mexicanas, to claim the street for a day and night was something when it wasn't particularly a safe environment for women and for Latinas. So a little bit of the story of the festival, and this is and how the exhibit came to be. Here it is. All you have to do is type in Festival de Mujeres 1979 exhibit and it should come up. So the inspiration for it came from a 5-minute video, which was most of what we had to document this historic festival. I'd recommend that you watch it, but some of the things that really impressed me about this video that was filmed by Eleanor Boyer and Karen Pugh back in '79 were, for instance, let's see, there was a very powerful poetry reading. This is really slow, by Salima Rivera, along with Marta Collazo, 2 Puerto Rican poets, and Salima Rivera was a very important Latino cultural organizer in Chicago. So one thing that this said to me is, even though this was largely a Mexican immigrant community, there was cross-ethnic stuff going on there. These were Puerto Rican poets. And then another thing that really impressed me from the video, and you can see I did more research with the other person who did this exhibit with me, Diana Solis. She's an artist, a teaching artist, and she was co-organizer of the festival, and she was on staff at Mujeres back in 1979. But in the video, I saw that there were women building the stages, etc. So I learned that these were very early women carpenters who were training in the carpentry profession as union carpenters. They included Latinas. And this kernel would evolve into an important group called Chicago Women in Trades. So that also really intrigued me. And also it was intergenerational, the festival. And it also included people from Mexico. So whether they plan to stay in the United States or plan to leave. And one example of that was Malu Ortega, who worked with Casa Aztlán at the time, had gone to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and had been commissioned along with another artist to do a really important mural in Pilsen called A la Esperanza. And this was on the new high school in Pilsen called Benito Juarez High School that many Mexican immigrant women and others had fought for a high school in their community, not only to have one in the community because there wasn't one, they didn't have a high school, but also to have one that would be culturally empowering rather than see being Mexican or speaking Spanish as a deficit, which I think was the model before that high school opened. So as you can see, there were a number of really intriguing things in this 5-minute video. And to me, it said that Latina feminism and the Latina women's organizing was very rich. It wasn't a secondhand copy of white feminism or even of Black feminism, although it had, relationships and inspirations from both of those. I particularly have time to tell you about the journey of how the exhibit came to be. I will mention that we were very fortunate to get funding from a wonderful program called USLDH. If anyone is interested in Latino digital humanities, I'd highly recommend checking out their grants and their training. But also, we were able to find some amazing things like the program of the festival. Oh my gosh, maybe there's only one in existence. But a friend of Diana Solis's, who was a clown at the festival, kept a program. And we discovered that it was in her archives. So we got the map of the festival, a list of who participated. We had the schedule of when people presented, when there were film screenings, so an incredible amount of information. And also, I do want to mention that those beautiful photos that you saw on the digital exhibit were done by Eleanor Boyer's husband, a photographer and filmmaker who was actually very early faculty at University of Illinois Navy Pier. So before there was even a U of I Circle campus. So he went with her when she was making the video. He took the photos, but they had been stored for 45 years. And we found out when we went to Eleanor to ask her for permission to use the video, oh, by the way, my husband took all of these photos. So, so anyway, I feel like we were able, Diana Solis and I were able to put together a pretty rich exhibit on this important event, but also to me, it's kind of a window, one window into the richness of Latina and especially Mexicana and Chicana feminism in Chicago at the time. And I just want to mention some of the things that I feel like I learned from this research. One is, again, the intergenerational women's movement in the neighborhood. And the festival motto was in celebration of what women have done, are doing, and can do. So to me, that's like the 3 generations. The early the grandmothers, the mothers, and then the daughters and children. So intergenerational, the fact that everything was done by women in the festival, including building the stages and the carpentry, that it was cross-ethnic and also interracial. So there were white women allies involved in Mujeres and the festival, and there were also Black women and Black organizations at the festival. Right now, Chicago is very racially segregated. Would you agree with me on that? Well, it was a lot worse. I don't know if it was a lot worse, but it was bad. It was a lot worse in 1979. So to have women of different races working together to support Latinas, I think is really fantastic. What? Okay. So all right. that the festival and the community embraced Mexicans, even Mexicans who were, just visiting or planning to return, and weren't staying in Pilsen. They addressed reproductive and health rights at the festival in a very Catholic community. There was a lot of emphasis on reading, books, and education. For example, Latino Youth Alternative High School was represented at the festival. Dr. Ramirez, who we're hearing from soon, worked at Latino Youth. But another person who worked there at the time was Sandra Cisneros. Some of you may have heard of her, one of the most important writers in the United States, has won many awards and wrote a book you may have heard of called House on Mango Street. Well, this was before she had published the book, and she read some of her poetry. At that time, she was a creative writing teacher at Latino Youth Alternative High School. So arts and creativity were seen as central to Mujeres. They were dealing with family violence. They were dealing with teen runaways. But it wasn't just, oh, we have to deal with these hard issues. They felt like art, from talking with the festival organizer, Diane Avila, who later went on to become probably one of the first Latinas in Pilsen to graduate from Harvard Medical School. But she said that Mujeres really believed in creativity and arts to empower women and empower the community. And then finally, I wanted to mention that there was overt LGBTQ participation at the festival. Can you go to the next slide, please? So there were queer women and they called themselves lesbians at the time, like Diana Solis. They didn't necessarily announce themselves at the festival, but they did have a group that performed and that was on the program, who were friends of Diana's, called Sister Blues and the Blue Suede Dyke Band, DYKA. So it was an overtly lesbian group. They were welcome to the festival. It was an interracial group. So the woman on the left, Allison Clark, was in the group. So I think you can see the women's movement was very vital and fascinating and powerful at the time. And please check out the digital exhibit and share it in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you so much. I really would like to especially thank Hinda and Adriana for the invitation. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there in person. Hopefully one day I'll get there so I can talk more at length with Hilda and Adriana and all of the group there. I wanted to mention that I also have a bicultural family. My husband is Mexican. My 2 children are bicultural, bilingual. I also have a trans daughter. So we, the diversity, inclusion, belonging, as we talked about earlier, and it was talked about earlier, is something very important to me, both as a professor and as a mother. So next slide, please. I wanted to talk about today, and it kind of is nice that with Hinda's presentation, some of the work that I've been doing recently here in the Mexican context has been with fourth wave feminist activism in higher education, young feminists that have been protesting and demanding public universities and private universities to have protocols for gender violence in our institutions, which is a bit of different history between Mexico and the United States. The United States that it has had Title IX for quite a while. Nothing of that kind of policy has existed in the Mexican context. So it's something that's been really important, and especially in the last 5 years and with the Me Too movement and other movements within the region, it's been something that's been important and something that I've been interested in studying, doing interviews with activists, studying their publications in Facebook, Instagram, and other social media. And currently, well, since 2022, the University of Colima is one of 10 Mexican universities participating in a nationwide study about gender violence in the university setting, and advocating for more policies in those institutions. In the case of the University of Colima, we have our first gender violence policy in 2019, the first full extensive gender violence policy. So it's really new. And so we're still studying that and how we can improve, and the contact with students that are feminist activists. And at the same time, as a feminist academic and professor, I know that I have a lot of colleagues, and there are a lot of feminist academics doing a lot of important work in the classroom to promote gender inclusion, diversity. And so I've also been studying that, with first starting in Colima, in public and private universities in Colima. And we're hoping to extend that study to other Mexican universities as well, to see how Mexican feminist academics are applying gender inclusive practices in the classroom. Next slide, please. So the feminist activism of young people, of young women in Mexico, it cannot be ignored. And it's one of those things where, as has been talked about and people have mentioned today, what happens in society, definitely it happens in the university, and we can't have a blind eye. So here are a couple of photos from some of the student activism. These photos are from 2021, but in the last few years, almost every year, and especially around International Women's Day or the 25th of November, which is the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women, a lot of the feminist collectives take advantage of those dates to protest and rally and make visible gender violence that's happening within the university. And so they're very vocal about it, and also trying to get the university to take charge and sanction professors or other persons that exercise gender violence. One of the signs there says UDC, which is University of Colima, stop the impunity. So asking for the policies to be rightly enforced. Next slide, please. What have been some of the demands? The demands of the fourth wave feminists. One of the principal demands is non-sexist and inclusive education, and that I think is really important to mention. Also, that students have mandatory gender sensitivity workshops, institutional support for feminist student collectives, mandatory teacher training on gender and non-sexist teaching practice in all fields as something that has been emphasized, and gender in the university curriculum in all areas of study. These particular demands have come out of some of the workshops that we've done with student activists in the University of Colima. The university has taken through our Gender Studies Center. We have been working on lots of workshops, including a masculinities program. And so some of the things, and teacher training is not mandatory, but we do almost in every teacher training period that we have here in December and August each year, we offer courses. So some of the things we are working on, the part that in all Mexican universities where there's a big challenge is the curriculum. We don't have a lot of gender courses, and a lot of universities, most of them are optional, although there are some programs that have had more advances than others, but in general, it's one of the areas that has been most highly resisted, I would say. Next slide, please. So taking into account the demands, the need, and the viewpoints of our feminist students, I wanted to also see what kinds of things feminist teachers are doing that maybe could be taken up in general in teaching practices by other professors. And in particular, I've had an interest in feminist pedagogies. My very favorite author is Bell Hooks. It's an author who I've studied a lot and have learned a lot from, and is a beautiful writer. She always talks about empowering students to use their voice. She has a beautiful phrase in some of her writings to help students find their inner light, which I love. And in general, reading different authors about what are feminist pedagogies, we try to have a shared authority in the classroom, reconfigure student-teacher relationships. This is building consensus, taking decisions, including on contents that we review, how we're going to evaluate, what kind of activities they'd like to do, trying to make it meaningful as well, the learning experience from the needs of the students in this sense. I have to say, in a lot of the teacher training that I've done here, particularly in the context of Colima, from grade school through through higher education, this part of shared authority has been one of the issues that has been challenged and questioned a lot. To question, the power authority role that teachers have is one of the areas I think that's most difficult. Also, from the viewpoint of feminist pedagogies, there's put a value on student experiences, their voices, their diversity, which is one of the topics we've been talking about today, that has to come into play in the classroom and in the learning experience. Feminist pedagogies put classroom as the space for change, activism, and social justice, the space of the classroom as a privileged space to encourage in students, recognizing inequalities, discrimination in their own environments, in the university, in educational setting, to advocate for change. One area that's really important is from feminist pedagogies is the recognition of women's contributions in each discipline and field of study. One of the things that we recommend to teachers is include female and diverse authors in your bibliographies, in your readings, in your courses. And the questioning of patriarchal paradigms in education, question the gender norms and practices in education, recognizing, as I said, how discrimination and gender inequality operates in the educational settings is some of the ideas, basic ideas from feminist pedagogy. Next slide, please. Some of the feminist practices in the university classroom in Colima from our study of 22 feminist professors in Colima, some of the things that they talked about in the questionnaire that we applied was instilling feminist values in students, instilling ideas of equality, sorority, which in the Mexican or Spanish sense, sororidad, is a really important concept from feminist literature and research. The idea that women see themselves as allies, that we build each other up, recognize and make visible our contributions, empathy, the ethics of care, that all of that comes into play in teaching practice. Critical thinking skills is another area that's really important. That also includes dialogue, being able to listen to different postures, different perspectives, and be able to talk about it in dialogue and not shut down or not listen to someone just because maybe they have a different perspective, but to actually listen and build consensus. Cooperative learning, active listening, validation of diverse forms of knowing and knowledge. Feminist literature talks about situated knowledge, that it's relational. Also, knowledge can be collective. to recognize different kinds of knowledge that students can have based on their community, based on their culture, based on their own experiences, and bring that to the classroom to help the learning process. The questioning of power relations and dynamics in the classroom, in educational settings, is one of the things that the professors talked about, female professors talked about, bringing into the classroom, that discussion with their students, and also taking into account the role of emotions in the teaching learning process. In particular, and since the pandemic and post-pandemic, this has been a really important issue. No, so social emotional issues for students is something that we really need to take into account, to see them as humans and them see us as humans as well. Next slide, please. I wanted just to share a couple of the narratives that some of the female feminist professors shared with us to kind of give an idea of how they put into play some of these ideas. One professor said, "I give priority to the voice of female students in the classroom. I encourage private tutoring sessions to help build meaningful learning experiences. If there's a need to exercise leadership in teams, if possible, I privilege the quietest girls and dedicate myself to accompany them." And I think this is really important. In some discussions or forums that we participated, that there's been a questioning of why give priority to the female students' voices, but in patriarchal androcentric settings, especially in the context of our university, we see that a lot of the times, our female students question themselves. They don't want to participate. They're not used to being giving a role as a protagonist. And so as a feminist professor, we try to motivate that and instill that and help students recognize and develop their voice and leadership skills. Another professor said, "I conduct activities in teams of women and men so that they have various perspectives." That's one of the things that we also talk about from feminist pedagogies, from inclusive pedagogies, is not letting students all the time pick their own teams. When we do collaborative projects, that we as teachers and professors can have an eye to build diverse teams so that they have that experience, that they have to work together, they have to listen to each other and play roles to be more collaborative and cooperative. The professor continues to say, "I also encourage women's participation in a balanced way through purposeful questions. I intentionally make gender inequalities visible in classroom activities such as readings, forums, etc." That's part of incorporating gender into the curriculum. That, of course, it has to be an intentioned exercise. It's not going to happen if we don't do it, and if we don't intentionally bring these questions into the classroom and incorporate it into the activities that we're doing. Next slide, I think. This is a final reflection that we give in the article, one of the articles that we have that we've published about our study with feminist professors. And I think it's one of the things that is the goal and part of the feminist movement, is that political and the part of change and transformation, which is why why we're doing this. But anyway, we close our article saying, "We are filled with hope to see the implementation of dialogic education and strategies that help students learn to use their voice, especially for female students. Undoubtedly, learning to express oneself without fear, to be heard, and to know how to listen implies a powerful transformation in the lives of young Mexican university women." And I have some photos here of one of the most recent workshops. My research group here and team that we have of wonderful feminist professors, my colleagues, we do tireless work with a lot of workshops in the university, with other universities, in primary education. So one of our most recent workshops in September was with the tourism and gastronomy department, where they asked us to come and give a workshop on gender related to those areas. So it's something that we continue to do, and we hope that it'll slowly make a change. Thank you.